It was past midnight when Damon finished stress testing his weapons and feeling out his expanded mana pool. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he forced himself to focus and logged his materials. Monster fluids, herbs, base chemicals, each chosen on purpose. This would do. He hadn't bought ready-made poisons. They were pricey and traceable. Raw inputs left no trail, and he could blend what he needed himself. 2 killers first, 1 lethal, 1 fast. Then paralytics, incapacitators, and smokes for both offense and escapes. Smoke bombs that masked scent were a priority. 2 days, he muttered. That was how long he could keep shadow hunger suppressed and still think straight. After that, it would take over. The sweet spot was 50%, big stat bump, mine still his. Any higher and it got ugly. Not enough time. His magic lagged. While others flexed unique spells, he could barely form a basic shadow bolt. Not enough, he said. But with 5x, I can break them physically in an ambush. A head-on fight would be suicide. On the walk back to War Halls, he mapped the plan. Skip classes for 2 days. Finish prep. 1 target. Learn his habits. Strike on schedule. 1 more soul to level up. A level might push new system rewards, anything to tilt the odds. The dorm's front door was locked, as expected. The back would be too. It didn't matter. Night draped the academy, but he moved like it was noon, his eyes cut through the dark. He followed the hedge line and slipped through a concealed gap, an illusion most students never noticed. The passage opened into the dorm garden. From there, he slipped into a side door and into the kitchen. Heat, acrid smoke, the clang of metal. The place was wrecked, pans, utensils, spilled ingredients everywhere. In the middle stood Leona Veilfire, wrestling a pan of charred something. The pan hit the floor with a bang. Crap. The headmaid didn't hear that, she whispered, eyes wide. Damon pivoted for the exit. She saw him, vault to the counter, and grab his arm. You're here. I've been looking for you all night. I even checked outside the academy. Let go, he said, voice flat. She released him at once. Sorry. I'm just starving, and I couldn't find you. We're not friends, he said. Move before the headmaid comes down. Leona bit her lip, stung. But I'm hungry. He reached for the door anyway. Her face fell. Then her eyes sharpened, remembering the debt. 70% daily interest. He hadn't brought it up today, which meant it was compounding. Zenny, she said. He paused, turning with a cold look. What? I'll pay you if you cook and eat with me. And I'll clear yesterday's debt now. She pulled a pager from the pocket of her nightwear. Your number. He hesitated, then gave it. A beep sounded on his device. He checked the screen and froze. Leona Veilfire had sent 80,000 zenny. 80,000? I charged her 8,508.1 for 1 day's principal plus interest. He ran the math again. She had overpaid by a mile. Disbelief slipped into amusement. He smirked. What do you want to eat? Something like last time, she said, brightening. A lot of it. His mood rose with the balance. Easy money. He hadn't even added a fee for the food. Cooking for a noble dents my pride, but 80,000 patches it fine. Pride is cheap. Cash isn't. Fine. He rolled up his sleeves. I'll cook. You clean the disaster you made. Her eyes lit up. Yes, sir. She snapped a playful salute and started clattering pans again. Quiet, he hissed, wincing. Before the headmaid shows up. Damon watched Leona fumble with pots and pans, his expression unmoved while the clatter scraped his nerves. Too loud. That's enough. Sit. I'll handle it, he said, firm but even. Her beastkin ears twitched. She hesitated, then hopped onto a stool and watched him closely. He moved fast, stacking pans, scraping out charred sludge, restoring order, enough for the maids to finish in the morning. They won't like this, he thought, and pushed it aside. He laid out ingredients and began sorting. Vegetables, spices, cuts of meat, simple and quick. No veggies. Leona blurted, springing up. His glare froze her. Then he remembered she was paying. Fine, he muttered, setting the greens aside. Sit. Quietly. She pouted but obeyed. In beastkin terms, strength decided everything, and he'd already proved his. He focused on the meat, precise, efficient. Sizzle. A rich aroma filled the room. Damon stopped. The smell dragged him back to the forest. Carmen Vale's blood, dull eyes, the crunch of bone. His chest tightened, breath shortened, the pan blurred red. Remorseless stayed dormant. It needed pressure or danger. Without it, the weight landed full on him. His hand shook around the spatula. "Hey, you okay?" "You look off," Leona said, cutting through the haze. He drew a slow breath, eyes closing once. "I'm fine." He looked up. "Condiments?" "Yes." Her ears perked. He finished cooking and set the plates down. She dug in, then paused. "Eat. Not hungry. Our deal was you cook and we eat." He sighed, took a thin slice and forced it down. The taste was good, the memory wasn't. She chewed, studying him. "Em, are you okay?" He lifted an eyebrow. "Excuse me? You look different from this morning. From yesterday, too." "A beat. You smell like death." His eyes narrowed. Beaskin nonsense? Or did I miss blood? He mentally replayed every step. No splatter. Pressure tightened in his chest, enough to trigger, remorseless. Calm dropped over him. Guilt thinned, edges dulled. "You mean blood?" His voice was cool again. She shook her head. "Not blood." The scent of death got stronger. "It's in your eyes, cold like a sword. You're different, but I don't know how." She leaned in, sniffed. "Did you get stronger?" So maybe she's catching the emotional shift, he thought. Valderrama wrote beastkin, and some monsters can smell states. "Eat," he said, dismissive. "You owe me for the food. 3,000 zenny." "Okay." She nodded easily. Then softer, "You shouldn't be so gloomy. As your friend, I worry." He almost recoiled. "My friend? Since when?" "Since yesterday," she said, smiling. "We're not friends," he said flatly. Her eyes flickered, hurt then steadied. "We ate together, fought a strong enemy together, and dueled. That makes us friends." He sighed. The first meal was an accident. They didn't fight the council president. They ran. The duel was her blindsiding him, not friendship. He stood. "Listen, Leona Veilfire. I don't know how it works in Lothria, but this is Solthean, and I'm human. We're barely acquaintances." She dipped her head, stung but steady. "That's fine. The best friends start as strangers." He rolled his eyes and turned for the door. "Send the payment. If it's late, there's interest." He left her in the quiet kitchen. Leona sat there, bitter but undeterred, and muttered, "We are friends."
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
2 days had passed since Damon devoured the kind hunter, Carmen Vale. In that time, his shadow hunger had grown steadily. After his last experience, Damon had learned an important lesson. If he allowed his shadow to travel too far from him, beyond 1 kilometer, it would begin to consume shadow energy at an alarming rate. He had tested this limit carefully and made note of it. During these 2 days, Damon had attended only 1 class, potion brewing. When he entered the lecture hall, all eyes were on him, accompanied by hushed murmurs. The gossip had spread like wildfire. The class doubted his strength, and not in a positive way. Apparently, Leona Veilfire had shown up unannounced and beaten one of their classmates to a pulp for insulting Damon. Afterward, she declared loudly to the entire class that Damon was her best friend. Naturally, this sparked rumors. Many speculated that Leona had held back during her earlier fight with Damon to avoid humiliating him, which further fueled whispers about his supposed weakness. Damon, of course, couldn't care less. The only reason he had bothered to attend the class was for knowledge on potion making and to scope out his next target, Isaac Regardi. Isaac was a member of Marcus's group, one of the people who had abandoned Damon to die that fateful night, the night he gained the living shadow system. Revenge was his purpose now, and he would hunt them down one by one. Damon's stats had received a modest boost from his increased hunger, though not enough to affect his sanity. Yet, it was progress, and he would take every advantage he could. At present, he was in the library, scouring shelves for a book that could help him refine his poisons. These past 2 days had been hectic, filled with relentless training and experimentation. He had trained with the bow he'd acquired, tested his poisons and paralyzing agents on animals, and even suffered the consequences of his recklessness. One mishap involved Damon accidentally inhaling fumes from a beaker, causing him to pass out for several hours. Fortunately, the poison wasn't potent enough to kill him. Imagine dying from my own poison, he thought, shaking his head at the absurdity of it. Among his test subjects were a group of ravens. One of them escaped, and before he knew it, Damon had become the sworn enemy of every raven in the area. They harassed him relentlessly, diving at him whenever he stepped outdoors. Rather than let the situation frustrate him, Damon turned it into an opportunity. He used the ravens as target practice, sharpening his archery skills. Over time, his ability to pick up his bow, nock an arrow, and fire with precision improved significantly. Now, all he needed was to perfect one final poison, and he would be ready. He had already gathered all the information he needed about Isaac Rigardi. Tonight, he will die, Damon thought grimly, his resolve unwavering. There was a coldness in Damon's eyes as he opened the book and stepped aside to let someone pass. He felt a slight bump against his shoulder and heard the soft, apologetic voice of a female. Damon raised his head from the book, irritation flickering briefly on his face before he quickly suppressed it. He knew it wasn't genuine anger, but rather the aggressive effect of his shadow hunger. The sensation gnawed at him constantly, threatening to spill over into his interactions. The person he had bumped into was a young girl he recognized, an elf with white hair and striking gray eyes. She was Sylvia Moonvale, the second-ranked student among the first years. "My bad. Didn't see you there," Damon said, his tone flat and perfunctory. Sylvia tilted her head slightly, observing him. "It's fine. I should have been paying more attention to where I was going." Damon didn't bother with a more polite response, and while Sylvia noted his lack of courtesy, she chose not to comment. "Read exclusive adventures at Empire. Are you interested in medicine?" she asked after a brief pause, her voice calm but curious. Damon blinked, confused by the sudden question. "No, why?" Sylvia pointed to the book in his hand. "That's the Compendium of Cure-All Poisons and Medicines by the elf sage Madina. I assumed you had an interest in medicine, like me." Damon glanced down at the book. He hadn't paid much attention to its title. His focus had been entirely on the sections about poison. "Come to think of it, poison and medicine are two sides of the same coin," he mused, his expression thoughtful. His eyes flickered back to Sylvia, and an idea began to form in his mind. She was an elf scholar, reputedly knowledgeable about various topics. He had heard the whispers about Sylvia Moonvale and her intellect. Maybe I can use her talents here. "Yes, I am. Well, I dabble. Nothing too specialized," Damon said, his tone shifting slightly. "Are you any good? Or are you a novice like me?" Sylvia seemed momentarily surprised by his sudden shift in demeanor, but she welcomed the friendliness. "Well, I wouldn't say I dabble. I don't know a thing or two." Damon's eyes narrowed slightly, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Really now? Then you wouldn't happen to know why Slovak roots don't mix seamlessly with the sweat gland of an atone lizard?" Sylvia brushed her hair aside, considering his question. "That's easy. It's because the compounds in the root and the sweat glands dissolve each other. If you want them to work, you need a third compound to act as a binder." Damon listened intently, but frowned when she stopped short of revealing the binder. "Like what?" Sylvia tilted her head, as if the answer should have been obvious. "Salt. It works perfectly as the binder. In fact, it's the best option." "Salt, of course," Damon muttered, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. "Why didn't I think of that?" Sylvia turned to leave, her curiosity about Damon seemingly satisfied. "Well, goodbye," she said lightly. Damon raised a hand quickly. "Wait, how do I get rid of the smell if I'm using bodak poison?" She paused, glancing back. "You boil it. But if I boil it, won't it just evaporate into gas?" She shook her head. "That only happens if you boil it directly. Just add boiling water. The water will evaporate, but the heat will take care of the poison." Damon nodded, mentally noting her advice. He spent the next few minutes asking her more questions, each answered with the same calm precision. Before long, their conversation veered into broader topics. It became clear to Damon that Sylvia was an intellectual, much like himself. Unlike him, however, she came from wealth and had access to a vast collection of books growing up. He, on the other hand, had lacked such opportunities until arriving at the academy. He didn't realize how much time had passed until he noticed the sun setting. Reluctantly, he bade Sylvia farewell and left the library. Tonight, I will strike, Damon thought as he walked away, his resolve sharpened. But first, he needed to apply the knowledge he had just obtained from Sylvia. Effects of his remorseless skill kicked in, washing over him like a wave of ice. His mind became clear, calculating, and calm. He analyzed every detail of his plan, how he would strike, the precise timing, and his escape route after Isaac Rigardi was dead. But even as his thoughts ran through every possibility, he knew there were variables he couldn't predict. It's impossible to account for everything. I just need to stay cautious and adapt. Satisfied, Damon picked up his bow and took a moment to center himself. He uttered a short prayer to the goddess of doom, his voice low but steady. Let this be my enemy's doom and not my own. May the fates be with me, and let death guide my hand in the wars to come. The prayer hung in the stillness of the forest, and Damon let out a deep breath. He carefully concealed the quiver and dagger within his uniform. The bow was harder to hide, but at this hour, the academy grounds and nearby areas were deserted. The night was his ally, and the shadows his weapon. With everything in place, Damon melted into the darkness, his movements silent and deliberate. The hunt had begun. It was a moonless night, shrouding the world in near-complete darkness. For anyone else, the lack of light would be an obstacle, but not for Damon. His vision, attuned to the night, made the shadows his ally rather than his enemy. He moved silently, skirting the main path lined with lamps, where even the faintest noise could give him away. Ahead loomed the judgment halls, a dormitory second only to the extravagant war halls and opulence. Damon's target, Isaac Rigardi, resided on the third floor. Hidden in the bushes, Damon observed the building. The glow from Isaac's room spilled into the night, a beacon against the dark. He glanced at his shadow, the manifestation of his abilities, shifting restlessly beside him. I suppose Isaac is a night owl, Damon muttered, smirking. If it weren't for the student council president catching his group in town the other day, they'd probably be out partying by now. Your next chapter is on Empire. His shadow balled its hands into fists as if expressing its disdain for Isaac and his friends. Damon chuckled. Easy, buddy. This works in our favor. We can hunt them anywhere. Now, be useful. Go up there and tell me what Isaac is up to. The shadow saluted, darting towards the wall and slithering up to Isaac's window like a living wisp of smoke. From his position, Damon watched as the shadow peered inside. A moment later, it returned, its silent gestures conveying what it had seen. Damon smirked. Tobias Morgan in Isaac's room? Damon whispered to himself, recognizing the second figure. Interesting. 2 targets in one place. If Isaac disappears, Tobias will have no alibi as the last person to see him. I can make this fun. Damon settled into wait. He knew patience was key. Tobias would leave eventually, and Isaac would succumb to sleep, leaving him defenseless. This will be my third soul, Damon murmured, his voice low with anticipation. Once I take him, I'll level up. He opened his system panel, his eyes brushing the interface as it materialized before him. HP 50-50, Mana 90-90, Strength 9, Agility 12, Speed 25, Endurance 10, Class Shadow 23, Shadow Hunger Levels 53%, Shadow Level 1, Condition Shadow is mildly hunger, Attributes Umbra, Skills X5, Remorseless, Locked. He focused on the Shadow Level tab. Shadow Level 1. Your shadow level reflects your control and power over your shadow. Level up by feeding it and completing specific challenges or quests. Level up requirements. Souls consumed, 2/3. Just one more. Damon muttered, a faint grin creeping onto his face. Let's see what happens when I level up. The hour passed slowly, but eventually Tobias left the room. Damon watched as the lights dimmed, leaving Isaac alone. His shadow returned, confirming the boy was fast asleep. Damon nodded to himself. Okay, buddy, it's go time. He moved like a wraith, reaching the building's edge and scaling the wall. The climb was treacherous with few handholds, but his experience as a former thief served him well. At the third-floor window, he drew his dagger, sliding it into the narrow gap to lift the lock. With a faint click, the window opened. Damon pulled a small sphere from his pocket, a paralyzing gas bomb. He dropped it inside, quickly shutting the window behind it. Through the glass, he saw Isaac twitch in his sleep, his body succumbing to the gas. Damon waited, then drank an antidote from a vial at his side before reopening the window. He slipped inside, moving with deliberate caution. The room was dark, but his night vision painted everything in sharp relief. Approaching the bed, Damon loomed over Isaac, who lay helpless, his body unresponsive but his eyes wide with terror. "Hello there," Damon said, his voice a venomous whisper. Isaac struggled weakly, his lips trembling as Damon forced them open. With careful precision, he poured a few drops of the paralyzing agent inside. Isaac's eyes watered, his breathing ragged as he tried in vain to move. Who are you?" Isaac's voice was barely audible, choked by fear and the paralysis gripping his body. Damon leaned closer, his expression dark with cruel amusement. "What? Don't recognize me?" The trash commoner with shadow attribute magic and a pathetic mana of 30. Isaac's eyes widened in realization, his pupils darting as he tried to make sense of the figure towering over him. "Why? Damon Grey." Damon leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper, cold and final. "Tonight I am death." Isaac had never felt such raw, primal fear. His body refused to move, every muscle locked in place, his tongue heavy and unresponsive. The darkness of the room was suffocating, and worst of all, he couldn't see the face of his tormentor, Damon Grey. Tears streamed from Isaac's eyes as he lay helpless. Please don't do this," he whimpered, his voice a desperate rasp coated in despair. "I'll pay you. I have money. Lots of it. Millions of zenny." From the shadows, Damon's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Money? You think your wealth can save you?" Damon let out a cold chuckle. "How funny. Lark Bonaire said the same thing before he died." Isaac's trembling intensified at the mention of that name. Lark, he killed Lark. The realization slammed into him like a tidal wave. If Damon had killed Lark, there was no reason to think he wouldn't kill him too. The fear clawed at his sanity, and Isaac's breath quickened into panicked gasps. Damon stepped closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "You nobles are all the same. You cling to your wealth and influence, using them to ruin others, to take what you don't deserve. But when that power fails, you think money can save you. Guess what?" Damon's hand reached for the bedside table, grabbing Isaac's pager. The sound of the small device being picked up felt deafening in the stillness of the room. "When real power speaks, money takes 3 steps back," Damon continued, his voice like ice. "Because in the end, money loses its value before true strength. Your rules, your influence, they mean nothing here. I have the power now." Isaac's trembling was uncontrollable. Tears blurred his vision as he gasped. "Please, I beg you don't kill me. I'm the heir of the Rigardi house. You can't kill me." Damon smirked, his silhouette leaning closer to Isaac's trembling form. "Fine," he said, his tone suddenly calm. "I'll take your money." Isaac's heart leapt with a flicker of hope. His desperation latched onto those words like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. If he could survive this, he vowed to make Damon pay tenfold. "Your war bank account," Damon said, his tone demanding. "What's the pin?" Isaac heaved deep breaths, his voice shaky but compliant. "Of course it's—" Damon straightened, his smirk deepening. "Thank you. Now I no longer need you alive." "What? No. Wait." Isaac's eyes widened in terror as realization struck. He gasped, trying to scream, but his paralyzed body betrayed him. Damon chuckled softly, savoring the fear in Isaac's eyes. He doesn't think I'm stupid, does he? I've already confirmed the pin works. Now, I just need to kill him, transfer all his funds to Tobias Morgan, and let the trail lead to him. Investigators will piece it together however they want. And if not, I'll make sure they do. Isaac was sobbing now, his words slurred and desperate. Please don't do this. I beg you, someone, help me. Help! Damon stood over Isaac, watching him with a detached gaze. This was one of the many who had tormented him, a so-called noble who once towered high and mighty. Yet here he was, stripped of all power, reduced to nothing but a sniveling fool begging for his life. He can't even die with dignity. Pathetic. Isaac's muffled pleas barely registered in Damon's ears, his voice weak and choked. The paralyzing agent coursing through Isaac's veins worked perfectly, rendering him helpless. Even if he screamed at the top of his lungs, no one would hear him through the thick walls of this room. I won't waste my poisons on you, Isaac, Damon said coldly, crouching over his trembling victim. This might be slow, maybe even painful, but I think that makes us even, don't you? Isaac's face turned ashen as he struggled against the paralysis, his fingers twitching uselessly. Panic flooded his tear-streaked eyes as he fought to lift himself from the bed, but his body refused to obey. Damon reached for the pillow at Isaac's side, his movements deliberate and measured. Let me give you a soft and luxurious death, he murmured, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. A death befitting a noble. He climbed onto Isaac's body, his knees pinning down the man's feeble arms. Damon raised the pillow and pressed it against Isaac's face, forcing it down with unyielding strength. Isaac's muffled cries and futile thrashing did little to stop him. Damon's mind remained eerily calm, his remorseless skill numbing any guilt or hesitation. For a full minute, he kept the pillow pressed down, his breathing steady as he waited. Then, the system's chime echoed in his mind. Ding! You have slain Isaac Regardi. You have leveled up. You have gained 10 attribute points. You have awakened the skill, Shadow Perception. Damon exhaled slowly, climbing off the lifeless corpse of Isaac Regardi. It was done. Unlike the chaotic rush of emotions he'd felt when killing Lark, this time there was only a cold, hollow calm. His eyes shifted to his shadow, which seemed to writhe with anticipation. You could devour him now, Damon said, his voice flat. The shadow quivered in delight, stretching unnaturally as it moved over Isaac's body. Within moments, it engulfed the corpse entirely, leaving no trace behind. The system chimed once more. You have gained 5 attribute points. Experience tales at Empire. Your shadow is full. Damon turned to the pager lying on the bedside table. He quickly accessed Isaac's war bank account and transferred all the funds to the account of Tobias Morgan. Once the transaction was complete, he deliberately placed the pager in a semi-hidden spot under a shelf, ensuring it was just conspicuous enough to catch someone's attention. He moved to the window, carefully locking it with his dagger, before climbing down with practiced precision. Every step was calculated to avoid leaving any trace of his presence. Once he reached the paved path, he slipped away into the night, blending seamlessly into the shadows. By the time he returned to his dorm, the tension of the night had started to lift. He entered his room quietly, stepping over the mess in the kitchen. Leona Veilfire must have been searching for him again, probably to demand he cook something for her. Once inside his room, Damon finally allowed himself to relax. The passive effects of remorseless began to fade, and the adrenaline drained from his body. His hands trembled, his breath came in ragged gasps, but a faint smile crossed his lips. I leveled up, he whispered to himself. Opening his system panel, he saw that he had gained 15 attribute points in total, 10 from leveling up and 5 from devouring Isaac's corpse. But what truly caught his attention was the notification about his new skill. He opened his system panel, and the first thing he saw was a prompt. Do you wish to activate Shadow Perception? Y/N. Damon didn't hesitate. Yes, he whispered. The moment he confirmed, a familiar, overwhelming sensation surged through him. His vision widened, and his legs gave out beneath him. He fell to his knees, gasping for air as his shadow writhed and danced around him. His perception grew wider far beyond what a human should have. The sensation of his senses traveling through the shadows was familiar to Damon. He had felt this before, during moments when his shadow's hunger reached a critical level. Yet now, with the activation of shadow perception, the experience was far more intense, overwhelming, even. It was as though his awareness had expanded into a vast, infinite void, allowing him to sense everything connected to the shadows around him. Images and sensations flooded his mind like a relentless torrent, chaotic and alien to any ordinary human understanding. He saw himself from the vantage point of his own shadow, the objects in his room outlined in vivid detail. He could feel the shadows cast by the lamps outside his dormitory, sense the rustling of trees in the wind, and perceive the sprawling expanse of darkness under their branches. In this moonless night, where light barely reached, the world of shadows seemed like a colossal, seamless mirror reflecting countless fragmented images back to him. Damon's mind struggled to process the overwhelming influx of sensations. His vision blurred, his head throbbed, and he fell on the verge of screaming, but he didn't. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to regain focus. This wasn't his first encounter with shadow perception. Before he had gained the skill, his shadow had occasionally shared its unique perspective with him, albeit on a much smaller scale. He knew how to control it. The shadows operated similarly to human sight. While the eyes could take in a wide field of vision, the brain only processed a fraction of that data, storing the rest subconsciously. Shadow perception worked the same way. He didn't need to absorb every detail at once. What he needed was to limit the range of his focus, suppressing the flood of information until it became manageable. Damon took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Immediately, a weight lifted from his mind as his human vision was removed from the equation. He centered himself, focusing entirely on the world of shadows. Slowly, he began to rein in his perception, shrinking its radius until it extended only 10 meters around him. Good. This is manageable, Damon thought. He tried to reduce the range further, but no matter how much he concentrated, the field of perception stubbornly resisted shrinking any smaller. Every attempt to push it caused the range to expand instead, forcing Damon to stop and steady his mind. He treated it like balancing on a knife's edge, maintaining calm to prevent the sensation from spiraling out of control. When he felt stable, he cautiously opened his eyes. The dual perception of his human vision and the shadow's awareness was disorienting at first, but he adjusted quickly. The shadows painted the world in vivid contrasts, filling in gaps his eyes couldn't see. Explore more adventures at Empire. Damon took a tentative step forward, but his coordination faltered. His foot caught awkwardly, and he stumbled, falling to the floor with a thud. Ugh, ouch, he muttered, shaking his head. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As he sat on the floor, he couldn't help but smirk at the potential of his newfound ability. Shadow perception wasn't just a skill. It was a doorway to a realm of possibilities. However, mastering it would clearly take time. I'm still not used to this, Damon muttered as his shadow shifted closer to him. From his perspective, he could see himself, a young man with dark hair, black eyes, and a perpetually gloomy expression. His pale, smooth skin gave him an otherworldly look, one that only added to his brooding demeanor. This is going to be hard. If I don't focus, my perception will keep growing out of control. He glanced at his shadow, its dark form moving fluidly as if alive. This is how you normally see the world, right? Got any tips for controlling this? The shadow paused, mimicking a thoughtful pose by placing a hand on its chin. After a moment, it snapped its fingers as if struck by inspiration. With deliberate motions, it gestured over its eyes, indicating he should close them. Damon nodded in understanding. I see. Keep my human eyes closed until I adjust to this new perception. Makes sense. He sighed, a mix of annoyance and resignation escaping him. Still, it's going to be a bother. Feels like learning to walk all over again. With a final huff, he lay back on his bed. Before continuing his practice, he decided to check his system panel for an update on his stats and the specifics of the shadow perception skill. The familiar interface materialized before him. HP 50-50, Mana 90-90, Strength 9, Agility 12, Speed 25, Endurance 10, Class Shadow 200, Shadow Hunger Levels 0%, Shadow Level 2, Condition Shadow is full, Attributes Umbra, Skills 5x, Remorseless Shadow Perception, Locked. Damon raised an eyebrow, noting the changes to his stats. Shadow energy rose by 100. That gives me more time before I need to feed you again, he muttered, glancing at his shadow. His eyes shifted to the updated shadow level, which now stood at 2. Focusing on it, he pulled up the requirements for further advancement. Shadow level 2. Your shadow level reflects your control and power over your shadow. You can level up by feeding it and completing specific challenges or quests, granting stat points to enhance HP, mana, and other attributes. Level up requirements. Souls consumed, 0/5. Damon sighed. Now I need 5 souls to level up. Figures the difficulty would increase with each level. At least I've got 15 attribute points to distribute. He shook his head, pushing aside the thought. No distractions. Let's focus on the skill. Navigating the system menu, Damon selected Shadow Perception. Skill, Shadow Perception. Description: when the first mortals sought shelter from the sun's wrath, an old seer whispered, "The shadow is not an absence, but a mirror, a realm where souls walk untethered by the weight of form." Thus, in the echoes of Solthian myths and solar ion shades, the power of shadows emerged as a bridge between realms, offering perception not bound by flesh, but tethered to the world of the unseen. Effect extends the user's awareness into the realm of shadows, allowing the perception of movements and presences beyond the limits of light and sight. Type: passive/active. Cooldown: none. Damon's eyes narrowed as he read the description. Perception not bound by flesh, and it mentions Solar Ion, the sun continent. He knew a little about Solar Ion. It was a land of nomads and traders to the west, famous for its harsh deserts and fierce warriors. The myths tied to shadows and light intrigued him further, but he quickly redirected his focus. The skill's utility was obvious: vast spatial awareness that could prove invaluable for scouting or tracking. The challenge, however, lay in mastering it. Damon noted that the skill being both passive and active meant he might eventually learn to shut it off. Until then, I need to get a handle on it. No wonder the system asked if I wanted to activate it. If this had triggered during the incident with Isaac, I'd have been screwed. He shook his head at the absurdity of his situation. There was no time to dwell on hypotheticals. Before morning, I need to figure out how to live with this altered perception. Guess I'll take my shadow's advice and keep my eyes closed while practicing. I've already missed 2 days of classes. Any more, and I'll never catch up. Determined, Damon stood from his bed, keeping his eyes firmly shut. He took a cautious step forward, his shadow guiding him as he began his self-imposed training. For now, let's learn to walk and see. The world was dark and colorless for Damon. His eyes were blindfolded by a strip of black fabric, casting him into utter darkness. But the absence of color came not from the fabric alone. It was the result of his shadow perception. Viewing the world through shadows stripped it of vibrancy, rendering everything in monochrome hues. His newfound perception brought as much challenge as it did utility. His vision relied entirely on the shadows surrounding him. He could see through the inanimate shadows of walls, trees, or objects, but when it came to the shadows cast by people, his ability faltered. From them, he could only sense faint ripples, vague impressions of movement within the shadow realm. However, Damon had one advantage. He could see clearly through the perspective of his own shadow. Even if it moved far from him, it acted as a mirror, transmitting everything it saw back to him. That was a vast improvement from before. Previously, he had to rely on his shadow to try and mime its findings, a silent messenger whose gestures often left him guessing. He sighed, steadying himself by pressing a hand against the cold wall. Seeing through shadows is difficult, he muttered, the frustration evident in his tone. After hours of practice, he was finally starting to adapt. Yet, his shadow perception remained a fickle and treacherous tool. Shadows obeyed the whims of the light that birthed them. Even a slight shift in illumination could drastically alter his view of the world. It was disorienting, like trying to navigate through a kaleidoscope in constant motion. The night had been long, but he had made progress. Blindfolding his eyes had proven essential, forcing him to rely solely on this new perception. Damon made his way to the dorm door, his hand brushing lightly over its surface as he prepared to face the day. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. The blindfold was bound to attract attention, especially considering he was already treated as a pariah among the noble students. But it had to be done. If he didn't master this skill, he would remain vulnerable. The memory of being cornered by Lark Bonaire in the forest flashed through his mind, a grim reminder of what his lack of control had cost him. I need to understand depth perception, learn to adapt to the ever-changing view, and make it my strength, not my weakness, he resolved. With that thought, Damon pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. His movements were fluid, unhurried. Though blindfolded, he didn't stumble, relying entirely on his shadow perception. After hours of effort, he had managed to suppress its radius to 10 meters, giving him a clear but manageable range. Reaching the elevator, he extended a hand to find the buttons. The shadows within the small space outlined them clearly, allowing him to press the one for the ground floor with ease. It was early morning, the time when most students were bustling about, preparing to leave. Normally, Damon avoided this hour, preferring to move earlier or later to escape the judgmental gazes of the nobles. Today, however, he made no effort to dodge anyone. The elevator descended smoothly, the soft hum of its mechanisms filling the silence. When the doors opened, Damon stepped out into the lobby. He exhaled softly, bracing himself for the challenges of the day ahead. If he wanted to survive and thrive, he needed to conquer this new world of shadows. Your next read is at Empire. The ground floor of the dormitory exuded opulence. Chandeliers cast soft, golden light across the polished floors, and antique furniture adorned the space, giving it a grandeur more fitting for a palace than student housing. Not that Damon had ever set foot in a palace to compare. A handful of students were departing for their morning activities, while others lingered in the Western Wing's dining hall, indulging in breakfast. Maids moved about silently, attending to their duties with practiced grace. The air was filled with the soft murmur of conversation, the gentle clinking of porcelain, and the glow of sunlight streaming through the tall windows. To Damon, the most striking feature wasn't the luxury or the atmosphere, but the distorted interplay of light and shadows created by the humans in the room. His shadow perception picked up every movement, every shift in the light. The sheer number of people tested his control, forcing him to take a deep breath, and will his perception to shrink back to a manageable 10-meter radius before it spiraled out of control. The dining room, packed with nobles, was the last place Damon wanted to be this morning. He resolved to eat later at the cafeteria, where the crowd would be more varied. But as he turned to leave, Damon, the excited, boisterous voice, made him wince. He recognized it immediately. Leona Veilfire. Ignore her. Walk away. I can't deal with that nuisance this morning, he thought grimly, quickening his pace. Leona wasn't one to give up easily. Damon felt the ripple of her shadow as she closed the distance between them, her presence distorting the light around her. Just as she was about to grab his shoulder, he sidestepped smoothly, causing her to stumble forward and nearly fall. She regained her balance and turned to him with wide, golden eyes. "Wow, how did you do that?" she asked, her gaze flicking to the black blindfold covering his eyes. "And while wearing that, no less. Amazing. Is this some kind of special training?" Her awestruck tone drew curious glances from nearby students. Damon's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. This damn beast girl is getting on my nerves, he thought bitterly. Without sparing her a glance, he snapped. It's none of your business. Now scram. I've got nothing to do with you at the moment. Leona, unbothered by his rudeness, only smiled. Over the past 2 days, she had grown accustomed to Damon's abrasive demeanor, chalking it up to his personality rather than taking offense. Let's have breakfast together, she suggested cheerfully. You're not planning to leave on an empty stomach, are you? Damon scowled, keenly aware of the attention her loud voice was drawing. He needed to get out of here before things escalated. I'll pass, he said curtly, brushing past her. Wait, she called after him. I'll pay you 5,000 zenny to eat with me. That stopped him in his tracks. Slowly, a smirk crept across his face. I suppose I can make time, he said, his tone suddenly amiable. Leona beamed, clearly pleased with herself. She had a fair understanding of Damon by now. He was a man who put a price on everything. As long as you offered the right amount of money, he'd agree to almost anything. Their relationship was peculiar, to say the least. Perhaps it was the beginning of an unusual friendship, or perhaps it was nothing more than a transactional arrangement. For Leona, who lived by her emotions and instincts, it felt like camaraderie. For Damon, whose world was ruled by cold logic, it was simply business. The two of them found an empty table in the dining hall, away from the clusters of nobles. Leona seemed to be in high spirits, her golden eyes bright with energy. Damon, on the other hand, remained as gloomy as ever, his black blindfold giving him an almost spectral appearance. As soon as they sat down, the whispers began. Why is that commoner wearing a blindfold? Did that mongrel finally go blind? I can't believe he's still here at the academy. Don't worry, he'll be expelled soon enough. Just look at the brooch on his chest. It's only a matter of time. Damon sighed, trying to tune them out. This was precisely why he usually avoided the dining hall during peak hours. As the only commoner among the noble students in the war halls, he was a constant target for their disdain. His frown deepened as he felt 2 new shadows approach their table. They moved with purpose, their presence sharp and unmistakable. May I sit here? Damon didn't bother to look up. His response was immediate and flat. No. Explore new worlds at Empire. Evangeline Brightwater glanced at Damon, her curiosity piqued by the black blindfold obscuring his eyes. She could understand why he was wearing it, but it added to his mysterious aura. His demeanor remained as cold and detached as ever, though she got the distinct impression he had sensed her presence long before she spoke. The subtle reaction stirred a strange sense of déjà vu in her. Turning to Sylvia Moonvale, who stood quietly by her side, she searched for an explanation. The elven girl merely shrugged, offering no insight. Evangeline bit her lip, suppressing a sigh. Damon Grey was as standoffish as always, though it surprised her to see him seated with Leona Veilfire. She recalled the beastkin loudly proclaiming to the entire class that Damon was her best friend. There aren't any free tables left, so this is the only option, Evangeline said, her tone light but resolute. I hope you don't mind. Without waiting for permission, she sat down and pulled Sylvia into the seat beside her. Damon sighed, his irritation evident. Actually, I do mind, he said flatly, but clearly my words won't stop you. Evangeline bit her lip again at his bluntness. Leona, ever cheerful, smiled at the newcomers. Actually, I'm fine with it. The more, the merrier. Strong people should all stick together. Damon let out another sigh, his patience waning. Then I should leave. After all, I'm the Academy's weakest student. Leona shook her head firmly, her golden eyes sparkling with determination. No, you're the strongest. And my bestie. If Damon's eyes weren't covered by the blindfold, he would have shot her a glare that could freeze the sun. What is wrong with this girl? He thought in frustration. I've told her 100 times that I'm not. Whatever. I'm only here for the money. Evangeline, sensing the awkward tension, tried to steer the conversation towards something neutral. I didn't know the two of you were friends, she said, glancing between Damon and Leona. We are not friends, Damon replied coldly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Leona, undeterred, giggled softly. That's right, we're best friends. Damon exhaled sharply. I should just keep my mouth shut. There's no reasoning with this stupid beastkin. Breakfast arrived shortly after, brought in by the maids. Given Leona's presence, they wheeled in several food trolleys laden with dishes. However, the abundance of food wasn't just for her. They had clearly taken note of Damon's voracious appetite as well. That's the maids of the war halls for you, always observant. Despite the lavish spread, Damon wasn't particularly hungry. His shadow had been fed earlier, leaving him feeling oddly full. He ate in silence, letting the rhythmic clinking of cutlery and muted chatter fill the void. Evangeline, on the other hand, seemed intent on breaking the quiet. She directed most of her questions at Leona, focusing on her relationship with Damon. Leona, ever eager to talk about her bestie, launched into an enthusiastic recounting of their adventures. Sylvia Moonvale, seated beside Evangeline, was much like Damon. She remained mostly silent, only occasionally glancing up to show she was paying attention. Damon, however, frowned as he listened to the exchange. Evangeline's steady prying was far from subtle. She wasn't as cunning as he was, but her persistence was wearing thin. Leona, oblivious to the probing nature of the questions, was all too excited to share. And then we went to a tavern, Leona said brightly, but the student council president hunted us down. My bestie took her down, no problem. Sylvia, who had been quiet until then, perked up at the mention of the student council president. Her piercing gaze shifted to Damon. Is that true? She asked, her tone neutral but laced with curiosity. You really escaped from Lilith Astronova? Damon could feel her scrutiny through the shadows he used to see. Ignoring her would be easy, but a memory surfaced. Sylvia had once shared her knowledge of medicine and poison with him, and it had proven invaluable. I may need her expertise again in the future, he thought. Perhaps I should try to be friendly. It wasn't a big deal, he said finally. Just a simple trick, that's all. I got lucky. He shot a glare at Leona, though it went unnoticed thanks to his blindfold. Leona, oblivious to his displeasure, shoved more food into her mouth. No, it wasn't. It was... Shut up, Damon muttered coldly, cutting her off. Leona scrunched up her face and pouted, but obediently fell silent, her beast ears drooping slightly. The table returned to relative quiet, though Damon's thoughts simmered beneath the surface. Evangeline and Sylvia exchanged a look, both equally surprised. They had never seen the wild and unpredictable beastkin, Leona Veilfire, actually obey someone. Her usual boisterous and carefree attitude seemed to meld away in the presence of Damon Grey. Damon sighed deeply, his frustration barely concealed. Today was already proving to be an unusual day. Somehow, the Academy's so-called weakest student found himself seated with the strongest and most prominent girls in his class. What a terrible happenstance, he thought bitterly, glancing at Leona. Just eat so I can leave, he muttered. I don't have all day. Leona nodded cheerfully, flashing him a smile before diving into her food. Evangeline studied him for a moment, her curiosity getting the better of her. If I may, why are you wearing that blindfold? Can you even see? Damon ignored her completely, focusing instead on finishing his food. He hated the attention the three girls brought to their table, their presence drawing countless stares from the surrounding students. A gloomy loner like him had no desire to be the center of such unwelcome interest. Evangeline bit her lip, feeling the sting of his dismissal. She was trying to be polite, but his cold attitude made the atmosphere awkward. Sylvia noticed her friend's discomfort and decided to step in. She's right. Can you even see with that on? Damon paused for a moment, considering ignoring Sylvia as well, but quickly dismissed the idea. Her knowledge had proven valuable in the past, and he might need her expertise again. No, I cannot, he replied bluntly. My eyes can't see anything with this on. Leona's ears perked up, her golden eyes gleaming with curiosity. Is this some kind of training? How does it work? Damon didn't reply, maintaining his silence as he pushed his plate away. Leona, undeterred, grinned mischievously. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her pager. I want to buy your niceness and friendliness. My offer, 10,000. Damon's eyes narrowed behind the blindfold. This girl really had him figured out. She knew he wouldn't turn down easy money, even if it meant entertaining her antics. What haven't I done for money? He thought bitterly. I've begged, I've stolen. Selling a little pride is nothing. Sylvia and Evangeline frowned in unison, misunderstanding his silence. They must have assumed he was offended by Leona's brash offer. Before they could speak, Damon surprised them by smiling faintly, a rare and unsettling sight. The smile was faint and gloomy, but it was unmistakably there. Deal, he said, his voice carrying an edge of amusement. Both girls blinked in disbelief, their eyes widening. Damon had smiled. Raising his head slightly in Leona's direction, he continued, This blindfold is... He stopped abruptly, his posture stiffening. His shadow perception alerted him to someone standing behind him, their presence cold and invasive. The silence broke as an arrogant, self-assured voice rang out. It seems there aren't any free seats for the first years. May I sit here, Lady Brightware? The speaker didn't wait for a response, casually sliding into the seat opposite Damon. Damon's aura darkened immediately, a chill radiating from him as he sensed the intruder through his shadows. Xander Ravenscroft. Damon's eyes, hidden beneath his blindfold, would have burned with anger, resentment, and every negative feeling he could muster towards Xander Ravenscroft. But as they were shut and obscured, he could only rely on his shadow perception to sense the world around him. His mood darkened further when Xander chose to sit at the table. In Damon's monochrome world of shadows, Xander's high and mighty aura stood out like a polished blade. Xander radiated a commanding presence, the kind that seemed to demand respect by mere existence. It was as though he lived by an unshakable set of principles, carrying himself with a dignity Damon found both enviable and detestable. And that was precisely why Damon hated him. To Damon, survival was paramount, and he wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice principles, pride, or anything else necessary to keep breathing. That was the stark difference between the noble Xander Ravenscroft, born into privilege and strength, and Damon Grey, a commoner who had scraped and clawed his way through life. The feeling was mutual. Xander didn't seem to harbor any affection for Damon either. Enjoy exclusive adventures from Empire. Xander inclined his head in a polite gesture, addressing the girls at the table. Lady Moonvale, he greeted smoothly, his tone regal. He turned to Leona. Good morning to you, Lady Veilfire. Finally, his gaze fell on Evangeline. Apologies for the intrusion, Lady Brightwater. A good morning to you as well. But when his eyes settled on Damon, his expression hardened and his tone grew sharp. Commoner. Damon didn't miss a beat, sneering back with equal venom. Noble. The air between them thickened with tension, palpable to anyone paying attention. This was a rare occurrence. Xander rarely acknowledged Damon's existence. Most of the time, he would refer to Damon as insect in passing, even if Damon was standing right in front of him. Yet now he had looked directly at him, his disdain visible. Damon raised a teacup to his lips as a maid delivered Xander's breakfast to the table. His discomfort grew with every second. Here he was, the so-called weakest student in the academy, seated among four of the strongest. This is going to be a long day, Damon thought bitterly, setting his cup down. He could feel Xander's disapproving gaze on him, likely judging his surprisingly refined manner of holding the teacup. But Damon didn't care. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here for one reason only. Leona Veilfire had paid him to have breakfast with her. The things I do for money, he thought with a grimace. Sylvia and Evangeline both noticed the tension brewing between Damon and Xander. However, the bee-skin Leona remained blissfully oblivious, far too engrossed in her own thoughts. With a bright smile, she returned to her earlier question, ignoring Xander's interruption. Tell us. Damon tilted his head slightly. Tell you what. Leona grinned mischievously, leaning forward. You agreed to be nice, remember? You were going to tell us about your blindfold. Damon sighed, his reluctance evident. Fine, he muttered. Evangeline and Sylvia had been curious about Damon's blindfold as well. Xander, noticing their interest, raised an eyebrow and leaned forward slightly. Damon finally broke the silence. Like I said before, this blindfold is for my training. It's to sharpen my senses. Xander scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. What rubbish! You expect us to believe that nonsense. Damon didn't spare him a glance, deciding that ignoring Xander would be far more insulting than responding. Xander's scowl deepened, his frustration palpable. Sylvia, however, was genuinely intrigued. To her, Damon was shrouded in mystery, and she couldn't help but want to uncover more about him. But you can see, can't you? She asked curiously. Damon shook his head, his voice calm and measured. No, I can't. At least, not with my eyes. Sylvia's interest was piqued even further. As an intellectual, the idea fascinated her. She leaned in slightly, her tone inquisitive. How so? What do you use then? Damon didn't want to reveal his shadow perception, so he decided to keep his explanation vague. The eyes aren't the only way we perceive the world. We rely on them too much, but they can deceive us. By closing my eyes, I've trained myself to sense the world differently. It wasn't easy to adapt, but now I think I can see more clearly truths that my eyes would never show me. Sylvia and Evangeline exchanged impressed glances, clearly taken by his explanation. Xander, on the other hand, let out a derisive scoff. Preposterous. Damon still didn't look at him, dismissing the comment entirely. Leona's golden eyes sparkled with mischief as she raised her hand and grinned. How many fingers am I holding up now? Xander smirked, confident that Damon was about to embarrass himself. Without even turning his head, Damon replied. 4 fingers. Leona's grin widened as she changed the number. 2. 5. You've balled your hand into a fist. You're holding a fork. Leona ran through several gestures, testing Damon's abilities. Each time, he answered correctly without hesitation or movement. Evangeline clapped her hands together, her admiration evident. That's incredible. To think you could train your senses like that. Xander's smirk vanished, replaced with a scowl. It has to be a spell. There's no way he can see without his eyes. Sylvia shook her head, her expression thoughtful. No, I didn't sense any magic. He hasn't even moved his mana. Evangeline's amazement only grew, and she turned to Damon with a warm smile. You really are something. As expected from the one who defeated me. Xander froze, his eyes widening as he processed her words. He looked between Evangeline and Damon, his gaze narrowing with disbelief. That's ridiculous. I find it hard to believe that this commoner, with such a pitiful amount of mana, could defeat anyone, let alone you. Evangeline frowned, her irritation building, but before she could respond, Damon finally turned his head towards Xander. Is preposterous the only word you know? Damon sneered. You show up here uninvited, act like a lovesick fool, and expect people to take you seriously? I'm not sure where you're from, lover boy, but that's not how you win a lady's heart. Xander's usually composed demeanor cracked, and his jaw tightened in visible frustration. Leona, sensing drama, leaned forward eagerly. Lovesick? What does he mean, Damon? Damon suppressed a cruel smirk, relishing the opportunity. Right on time, he thought. The fool has a crush, obviously, Damon said, his voice casual but biting. He paused deliberately, waiting for Leona's curiosity to peak. Leona's eyes lit up with intrigue. On who? Tell me. And it better not be me. He's definitely not my type. Damon's smile turned wicked as he prepared to deliver the killing blow. It's that obvious, isn't it? Xander has a crush on. Xander slammed his hands against the table, standing abruptly. How dare you, commoner? I challenge you to a duel. Damon leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. Huh? Screw off. Why would I fight you, you retard? Xander Ravenscroft had never felt more insulted in his life, and the fact that it happened in front of Evangeline, his long-standing crush, only made it worse. Damon's calculated insult had been ruthless, delivered with precision and malice right before his audience. Damon leaned back, watching Xander fume with a detached amusement. No matter how high and mighty he acts, he's still just a teenager. I'll never understand these foolish crushes. Xander's outburst had not gone unnoticed. The quiet hum of the dining hall turned into a murmur as students began to whisper and cast curious glances toward their table. Is Xander Ravenscroft really going to duel that guy? Of course. If he has any honor, he'll demand satisfaction and fight. Wait, isn't that Damon Grey? No way. You mean the guy who's last in the rankings? That's him, the probationary student. Can you imagine? A nobody like him squaring off against Ravenscroft? Damon sighed, lifting his teacup again as the whispers grew louder. So much unnecessary attention. These noble idiots really think I'll fight, just because some pompous moron asked for it? Honor can kiss my ass. Xander, on the other hand, was seething. His fists trembled, his knuckles white as he gritted his teeth. Your cheap insults mean nothing, Xander growled. I challenge you to honorable combat. Damon didn't even look at him. He took a slow sip of tea before sneering. And I said, screw off. The sharp dismissal hung in the air, silencing some of the murmurs. The tension between the two was palpable. Evangeline and Sylvia, sitting at the table, were wide-eyed. The situation had escalated far beyond what they expected, and neither knew how to defuse it. Still, they understood that this reaction wasn't uncommon for nobles like Xander. Find adventures on Empire. Sylvia leaned slightly toward Evangeline, whispering, It's not unusual for a noble to resort to a duel when they feel insulted, especially from a warrior house like Ravenscroft. They're predictable that way. Evangeline nodded faintly, but kept her eyes on Damon, who seemed unbothered by the growing crowd and rising tension. The difference in demeanor between the two boys couldn't have been starker. Xander, fiery and indignant, and Damon, calm and utterly disinterested. Leona, who had been quietly observing, smirked. Her golden eyes glinted with amusement as she leaned forward, clearly enjoying the spectacle. She could barely contain her excitement, practically bouncing in her seat. Wow, Damon, you're going to fight him? I can't wait. Damon shook his head, his voice calm yet dismissive. I have no reason to play along with him. Just because someone asks for a fight doesn't mean I'll give it to them. Only idiots fight when they have nothing to gain. Xander scoffed, his irritation bubbling over. Are you afraid? If you truly defeated Lady Brightwater, then you shouldn't fear fighting me. Damon sighed, exasperated. I never claimed anything. I don't need to prove myself. Besides, she's the one who said I defeated her. Are you calling her a liar? Xander glanced at Evangeline, her expression neutral but thoughtful. Damon's words had undoubtedly discredited him in her eyes, and the realization stung. I would expect no less from lowborn trash. You have no honor, Xander sneered. Damon tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk playing on his lips. What good has honor ever done anyone? Xander's eyes narrowed, his pride bruised further. Sylvia, who had been silently observing, sighed as she rubbed her temples. Both of you need to calm down. There's no need for this. Damon shrugged. I am calm. You should tell that to Loverboy over there. He really needs to cool off. Xander's face flushed red with anger. Unable to contain himself, he grabbed Damon by the collar, pulling him closer. Damon stayed perfectly still, his head tilting slightly as though bored. Even with the blindfold over his eyes, he could see everything through his shadow perception. Xander's trembling hands, the redness of his face, the frustration in his eyes. Calmly, Damon spoke, his voice chillingly low. Hey, if you don't want to die, I suggest you let go. I have no interest in childish duels. But if it's a battle to the death you want, I can oblige. We can walk into the forest together. Only one of us will come back. His tone was flat, almost disinterested, but it carried an unmistakable weight. The room seemed to darken slightly, the shadows in the corners of the room subtly deepening. To everyone else, it was a suffocating wave of killing intent, cold and undeniable. Leona, usually unfazed, shivered. Sylvia bit her lip, trying to suppress the unease that crept up her spine. Even Evangeline, poised as she was, couldn't hide the flicker of surprise in her expression. This was no bluff. Damon's killing intent was the kind that only came from someone who had taken a life before, and done so willingly. Xander, fueled by noble pride and unable to back down, kept his grip on Damon's collar. Damon, unimpressed, began to reach into his uniform jacket. "That's enough," Sylvia interjected, standing up abruptly. Her voice was steady, but her gray eyes betrayed her unease. First-year students are not allowed to battle to the death, especially not over something so trivial. Xander hesitated before letting go of Damon's collar, his pride still intact but visibly shaken. Evangeline nodded in agreement. "She's right. This is unbecoming." Xander sighed, his frustration evident. "Then how do you suggest we settle this?" Sylvia folded her arms, her brow furrowing as she considered. "We only have one theory-based class today. The rest are practical. Our last class is Professor Blackthorn's anti-magic combat training, right?" Damon raised an eyebrow beneath his blindfold. "So," Sylvia's gray eyes gleamed with an idea. "You can compete there." Evangeline shook her head. "I highly doubt Professor Blackthorn would allow them to fight directly. Unless—" Sylvia nodded, cutting her off. "That's right. They wouldn't be fighting each other. Instead, they can take on the magic artillery. Whoever lasts the longest at a set difficulty wins." The mention of the magic artillery made everyone pause. A relic from the magic continent, the artillery was originally designed for the demon wars, but had since been repurposed as a training tool. It fired relentless barrages of magical attacks at the user, testing their speed, reflexes, and barriers. Xander sat back down, crossing his arms. "Very well, then." Damon scoffed. "And why should I? I gain nothing from this." Xander glared at him, but Leona raised her hand, grinning mischievously. "I know. Xander pays you if he loses." Damon held his chin, pretending to ponder. That worked for me. 500,000 zenny if I win." Xander scoffed, his lip curling. "You truly have no honor." Damon sighed, leaning back casually. "Since when has that ever mattered?" Xander clenched his fists, his pride unwilling to let him back down. "Very well, but if I win, you will offer me a public apology." He glanced briefly at Evangeline, clearly hoping to impress her. Damon turned his blindfolded face toward Xander, his voice carrying a confident edge. "You won't win." In his short life, Damon had learned a few harsh lessons, and they had served him well. When you are weak, appear strong. When you are poor, act rich. But the most important lesson was this: never get into a battle you couldn't win. Damon never gambled unless he had at least an 80% chance of succeeding. This situation was no different. As he weighed what he stood to gain against what he could lose, the odds seemed to even out. With 500,000, I can finally transfer Luna to a better medical facility. I can't lose. He clenched his fists under the table, hiding the intensity of his determination. He understood the stakes. Xander's demand for an apology if he lost seemed trivial compared to what Damon stood to gain. Nobles and their vain nonsense. He thought bitterly, nearly sneering at the idea. Victory was the only option. Damon was confident in his familiarity with the magic artillery, especially if he chose an attribute that worked in his favor. The odds of success were high. He glanced downward, his shadow stretching faintly across the floor. While he couldn't see it with his blindfolded eyes, his shadow perception skill gave him a perfect vision of it, along with the rest of the room. Oddly, it felt as though the shadow was watching him back. Across the table, Xander continued shooting icy glares his way. Damon's calm confidence seemed to grate on the aloof noble, whose pride wouldn't allow him to back down. Pushing his chair back, Damon stood, brushing off his uniform. "We've got philosophy of magic next," he said, turning to Leona. "I'm out." Leona wrinkled her nose in disappointment. "That sounds boring." Sylvia tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear as she stood. "He's right. Let's go. We might be late if we don't hurry." Evangeline nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Professor Chrome is teaching this class, right?" The mention of Chrome seemed to pique Xander's interest. However, the others could tell Evangeline wasn't really asking a question. "Yes," Sylvia answered. "He mostly teaches theory courses, history of the demon wars, philosophy of magic, demonology, dungeon characteristics, monster ecology, things like that." Xander nodded. "He is also a commoner." Evangeline nodded again, her tone distracted. Right, I knew that. Experience tales with Empire. Damon saw the perfect opportunity to discredit Xander and couldn't resist taking a jab. Wow, you really impress her there, lover boy. Xander's glare turned sharp, his fists clenching. Speak one more time, and I'll... That's enough, Sylvia interjected, her tone cutting through the brewing tension like a blade. Let's just get to class. Damon stood up, his expression as grim as ever, and Leona quickly followed, stepping to his side as if claiming her spot. Evangeline and Sylvia, walking close together, also got up. Xander, heading to the same class, joined them, making their group look oddly cohesive, like a group of friends. Damon wished they would just leave him alone. As they exited through the main entrance, Damon's senses heightened. His shadow perception caught the subtle movement of something swooping down at him. The direction and speed were clear in his mind. With a swift motion, he waved his hand, smashing the attacker out of the air before it reached him. A loud caw followed as the raven crashed to the ground. Damon smirked to himself. They almost caught me off guard. Good thing I have shadow perception now. The vendetta between Damon and the Academy's ravens was long-standing. It had started when he captured a few to test his poisons. One had escaped, and ever since, the ravens seemed to hold a grudge against him. Naturally, Damon had turned this animosity into target practice, escalating their feud into a bizarre man-versus-bird rivalry. Sylvia Moonvale hurried to the fallen raven, gently scooping it into her arms. "You poor thing," she said softly, her voice brimming with concern. Damon observed her indifferently through his shadow perception. "Can't believe these stupid birds still recognize me, even with a blindfold on." Evangeline glanced at him, her tone curious. "I can't believe you sensed that raven coming. It didn't even make a sound." Leona's golden eyes sparkled with pride. Of course. What else can you expect from my bestie?" Xander sneered, his disdain evident. "Your so-called bestie just smited a poor bird. That's nothing to be proud of." Sylvia frowned as she examined the raven. "It has a broken wing." She glanced at Damon. "And I think it hates you." Damon sneered, his face as gloomy as always. "Really now? Had to use your elf powers to figure that out, huh? I could have told you that." Sylvia narrowed her eyes at him. "You really are a rude person, you know that?" "I try not to be." "Well, try harder." Sylvia gently adjusted the raven's wing, her movements delicate. "What did you do to them?" "Ravens are gentle birds. They don't make enemies unless they've been crossed, and they never forget." Xander scoffed. "I suppose people aren't the only ones who find you unsightly. Animals, too." Damon ignored him, his voice calm but sharp. "Just let me kill it. All grudges end with death." Sylvia's glare could have frozen him on the spot. "No. Have you been killing them? That would explain a lot." Crossing his arms, Damon replied nonchalantly, "I didn't start this. They did, but I'll end it." Actually, he did, but who was going to argue against him? Sylvia trembled with visible anger, but forced herself to stay calm. "Why are you making animal cruelty sound like a war? You must have offended the ravens first." Damon sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Why does that matter? If they all die, then no more grudges." Sylvia gritted her teeth, but held herself back. She glanced at the raven in her hands, her expression softening. "Healing moonlight," she whispered. A gentle, white glow enveloped the bird as Sylvia's lunar attribute magic worked its miracle. The raven stirred awake, its broken wing now healed. Sylvia smiled warmly as she cradled the bird, a serene sight that seemed almost divine. But the tranquility shattered when the raven's gaze landed on Damon. Its feathers ruffled, and it let out a furious caw. "Evil, evil, evil. Killer, killer, killer." Xander smirked. "Even the animals can see your true nature." Damon kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he sighed. "Right? Ravens can talk. I forgot that." Sylvia stood up, glaring at him. "Apologize to the ravens." Damon scoffed, crossing his arms. "Why in the goddess's name would I apologize to a bunch of birds?" He attacked me. Through his shadows, he noted her sour expression and hesitated. For a moment, his blunt demeanor cracked as he reminded himself that Sylvia could be useful. If I want her help, I should at least try to stay in her good books. He sighed deeply. Fine as you wish. Leona giggled. Wow, I can't believe you made Damon agree so easily. Damon's annoyance only deepened as he stepped closer to the raven in Sylvia's hands. I apologize to you for any grievances. Sylvia smiled at the raven. Now forgive him, Mr. Raven. The bird stared at her, then at Damon, before hopping onto his head with a triumphant caw. Get off me, you. Damon raised his hand to swat it away, but Sylvia caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly firm. Her gray eyes locked with his blindfolded eyes, a mischievous glint in them. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Damon clenched his teeth, barely restraining the urge to snap. Screw off, he thought bitterly. Evangeline stood back, quietly observing the unfolding chaos with an amused smile. It was rare to see Damon so out of his element. The usually stoic and distant figure was now at odds with a raven and an elf, and it was undeniably entertaining. Even Sylvia, who was typically calm and reserved, seemed unusually spirited in defending the bird. The raven perched smugly on Damon's head, ruffling its feathers as if declaring victory. Damon's frown deepened with every passing second, his patience clearly fraying. Sylvia's gentle smile, however, remained unwavering. Looks like he's decided to stay, she said lightly, stroking the bird's feathers. Damon gave her a deadpan look. Did he tell you that? Or are you just guessing? Sylvia tilted her head playfully. A little bit of both. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. Get this bird off my head, or it's going to be dinner. The raven squawked indignantly, hopping off Damon's head and onto Sylvia's arm. Find adventures at Empire. Caw-caw. Killer, killer. Caw-caw. Evil, evil. It shrieked, clearly satisfied with itself. Through his shadow perception, Damon studied the bird. The morning sunlight glinted off its glossy black feathers, except for a small, bare patch near its wing. His gaze narrowed as a memory surfaced. This was the same raven that had outwitted him during one of his poison tests. It had feigned paralysis long enough to escape, earning his disdain and apparently its grudge. So that's why it hates me. Clever little pest, he thought grudgingly. Sylvia interrupted his musings. You should keep him, she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. As a way to atone. Or so I think he says. Damon raised an eyebrow. So you're just guessing. Sylvia brushed her silver hair aside with a graceful motion, her tone turning mock serious. Well, yes. I'm not a beast tamer. After all, I'm not keeping that thing. Damon retorted firmly, crossing his arms. Sylvia's playful expression sharpened into a glare. The raven hopped onto her shoulder, as if emboldened by her defense. Yes, you are, she declared. You broke its wing, traumatized it, and started this ridiculous feud. The least you can do is give a home. Damon shook his head. Not a chance. It's a wild animal. It can fend for itself. The raven squawked again, wings flapping dramatically. Evil, evil, killer, killer, it screeched, fixing Damon with its piercing black eyes, full of judgment. Sylvia's lips curved into a triumphant smirk. See? Even it knows you're in the wrong. You owe it. Damon closed his eyes, exhaling heavily. His day was only getting worse. He groaned, his shadow flickering underfoot as his frustration threatened to boil over. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the irritation clawing its way to the surface. Look, I don't have time to babysit a vengeful bird. I've got no choice, Sylvia interrupted, her voice firm and resolute. Her silvery hair caught the sunlight, swaying slightly as she placed a hand on her hip. It clearly has unfinished business with you, and I'm not letting you leave it to suffer. Consider this your penance. No. Sylvia's gaze sharpened. Damon, stop being stubborn. Through his shadow perception, Damon instinctively observed the world around him. But when his gaze fell on Sylvia, something shifted. Her expression, her posture, the way her silver hair framed her face, all of it blurred into an unsettling resemblance to her. Luna, for a brief, disorienting moment, his shadow perception spiraled out of control, expanding wildly. The flickering shadows around him distorted the air, their edges unraveling like frayed threads. Damon winced, clutching his head to rein it back in. Sylvia frowned, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" He steadied himself, exhaling sharply as he regained control. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice strained. His eyes flicked to the raven, then back to Sylvia. "I'll take the damn bird." "Luna." Sylvia blinked, caught off guard. What? Did you just forget my name?" "It's Sylvia." Damon bit his lip, realizing his mistake. He quickly shook his head, searching for an excuse. "I know. I was referring to your lunar attribute." Sylvia crossed her arms, unimpressed. "Don't refer to people by their magic attributes, Shadow." "Then why are you calling me by mine?" Sylvia's lips twitched into a sly grin. To even things out, the raven cawed triumphantly, puffing out its chest as if it had won. "Evil! Evil! Killer! Killer!" it screeched, flapping its wings dramatically. "TCH!" Damon clicked his tongue in annoyance. Xander, who had been watching the scene unfold with a bemused expression, finally spoke. "There's a difference between a pet and food, commoner. I hope you don't confuse the two and end up eating that bird." Damon's eyes narrowed, his voice laced with venom. "You really like hearing yourself talk, don't you? If you stayed quiet, no one would think you were dead." He turned his gaze to Leona and Evangeline, who had been standing nearby. These two were here the whole time, and they didn't feel the need to run their mouths. Evangeline sighed, her arms crossed. "Can the both of you not get into it right now? Save your energy for the duel." Xander glared at Damon, but kept silent, scoffing under his breath. Leona laughed, brushing a strand of black hair behind her ear. "Damon, what's the plan? How are you going to beat him? I can't wait to see your skills in action." Damon ignored her, turning on his heel and heading toward class. This day just keeps getting more and more annoying. As he walked away, the raven flew from Sylvia's arm and landed on his shoulder. "Evil! Evil!" it squawked again, settling into place as if it belonged there. Sylvia chuckled, her usual calm demeanor softened by amusement. "See? It's already bonding with you." "If it proves to be a nuisance," Damon muttered, "I'm going to kill it." The raven tilted its head, cawing defiantly. "Evil! Caw!" Sylvia raised an eyebrow, curious. "What are you going to name him?" Damon stopped in his tracks, a sly smirk curling on his lips. He glanced over his shoulder at Xander, who had been watching with a sneer. "I think I'll call it Ravenscroft," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Xander's expression darkened instantly. He recognized the insult for what it was, a deliberate jab at his family's name. Sylvia hesitated, her smile turning wary. "I don't think that's a good idea." Damon's smirk widened. "Then it's decided. His name will be Ravenscroft. Croft for short." Xander Ravenscroft's composure snapped. His voice trembled with fury as he stepped forward. "You dare, you lowly commoner." Damon sat at the back of the class, as he always did. Except this time, he had company, a fact that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Leona Veilfire, his self-proclaimed best friend, sat directly to his right, her black-white hair glowing faintly in the soft classroom light. She lounged back casually, grinning as if she owned the space. Sylvia Moonvale, on the other hand, claimed the seat to his left. Her excuse was simple. She was there to ensure he didn't harm the raven now perched on his shoulder. Evangeline had also followed, though she hadn't bothered to offer an explanation. She simply took a seat nearby, her quiet presence both calming and bright. And then, of course, there was Xander Ravenscroft. His aristocratic scowl practically burned a hole in the back of Damon's head, his indignation over Damon naming the raven Ravenscroft still fresh and palpable. Damon could see through Xander's thinly veiled anger. It wasn't just about the name. Xander clearly wanted an excuse to hover near Evangeline. The crush he harbored for her was obvious, and Damon figured he was merely using their antagonism as an excuse to stay close. Damon sighed. He hated crowds, hated people being close to him. Having this many around made his skin crawl, feeding his ever-present paranoia. What is their angle? Damon thought, his jaw tightening. What are they trying to achieve? Is this some kind of plot? He couldn't shake the unease. And then there was that earlier incident with his shadow perception, a disquieting reminder of how little he understood his own abilities. Sylvia's words replayed in his head. Damon, stop being stubborn. It had been so innocuous, yet it struck a nerve. It reminded him too much of something his sister, Luna, used to say whenever she wanted something from him. He couldn't help but draw parallels between the two of them. The white hair, the similar eyes, even their shared magic attributes. For a brief moment, his shadow perception had twisted the world, making Sylvia's image bleed into that of his sister's. He clenched his fists, his hands brushing against the blindfold covering his eyes. He still couldn't fully comprehend this skill, this strange ability that was more curse than blessing. Pulling up the skill's description again, Damon read it in his mind as his shadow perception allowed him to view the system panel, even with his eyes closed. Skill, Shadow Perception. Description. When the first mortals sought shelter from the sun's wrath, an old seer whispered, "The shadow is not an absence, but a mirror, a realm where souls walk untethered by the weight of form." Thus, in the echoes of Solthean myths and solar ion shades, the power of shadows emerged as a bridge between realms, offering perception not bound by flesh, but tethered to the world of the unseen. Effect. The user's awareness extends into the realm of shadows, perceiving movements and presences beyond the limits of light and sight. Type. Passive/active. Cooldown. 0 seconds. Damon closed the panel and turned his focus back to Sylvia, using the very skill he was trying to understand. This time, her image didn't distort. She looked like herself, no haunting overlap with Luna's fragile features. Was it all in my head? He wondered, his brow furrowing. Read new chapters at Empire. The shadow is a mirror. The description echoed in his mind. He didn't understand everything about the skill, nor did he have full control over it. That meant it was entirely possible his mind had played tricks on him. Unconsciously, his gaze shifted towards Sylvia. She was sitting just inches away, her delicate fingers brushing the raven's feathers with a childlike fascination. There was an innocence to her in that moment, a rare softness that contrasted with the composed demeanor she often displayed. Luna. The thought flickered again, unbidden. He shook his head, trying to banish it. Of course, Sylvia Moonvale reminded him of his sister. They shared some physical and magical similarities. But Sylvia was an elf, not human like Luna. And the differences between them were just as striking as the similarities. Damon bit his lip, memories of Luna's pale, sunken face flooding his mind. He could still see her lying weakly in bed, her body frail and wasting away as illness consumed her. His hands balled into fists. I have to win the duel against Xander. I need the money. I need to get Luna better treatment. The shadows around Damon deepened, pooling around him like a living, breathing entity. They reacted to his thoughts, feeding off the frustration and resolve simmering inside him. Though the others in the room were oblivious, the raven on his shoulder cawed uneasily, sensing the shift in energy. Evil, evil, it muttered, its voice softer than usual. Damon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his blindfolded gaze turning toward Leona. "Hey, you still haven't paid me for my time this morning." Leona blinked, then scratched the back of her head sheepishly. "Oh, right, sorry about that. Almost forgot. Okay, let me pay now." She fumbled with her pager, quickly transferring the money to his war bank account. Xander, seated nearby, watched the transaction with visible confusion. "What? Why is she paying him?" He finally blurted out. Evangeline sighed, her tone laced with mild exasperation. "She paid him to act nice and friendly to us. And for having breakfast with her," Sylvia added, her fingers gently stroking the raven perched on the desk. Xander's eyes widened, his shock evident. As someone who held himself to high standards, this revelation was downright baffling. He pointed an accusatory finger at Damon. "Why you? Are you some kind of male prostitute? Or a host?" Damon sneered, his lips curling into a disdainful smirk. "No, a prostitute would have been cheaper." The bluntness of the response only deepened Xander's disgust. He couldn't fathom why anyone would charge money to have breakfast with a classmate. Do you only care about filling your pockets? Xander snapped. Damon sighed, exuding a mix of irritation and boredom. Yes, I do. I wouldn't expect a pampered rich boy who's never seen the real world to understand. So let me give you some advice. He turned his blindfolded face toward Xander, his voice laced with cold finality. In this world, there are no eternal friendships, only eternal benefits. Damon's words hung in the air, the weight of his cynicism pressing down on the group. Human relationships are forged on the principles of mutual benefit, he continued, his voice cutting like a blade. That's not true, Sylvia interjected, her voice firm as she looked him in the eye. Evangeline nodded in agreement. People can become friends without expecting anything in return. Damon scoffed. You're all so naive. What else can I expect from nobles? Leona pinched his arm sharply. Be nice, she chided, her expression somewhere between amused and annoyed. Damon sighed. Fine. Let me rephrase. The benefits you gain from a relationship don't have to be something tangible, like money or luxury. We stand to gain many things from forging these fleeting bonds. The self-gratification of being around someone you love, the joy of destroying someone you hate, impressing your family, or proving your worth. All of these are benefits, but in the end, these bonds always break, whether by choice or by cosmic design. A heavy silence followed his words. Leona bit her lip, her cheerful demeanor dimming slightly. But even so, having a friend is good, even if it's fleeting. Damon shrugged, his tone dismissive. I don't care. I'm more interested in what you people actually want from me. What's your angle? What do you hope to achieve? The only person here who's been clear is Xander Ravenscroft. And trust me, the feeling is mutual. Evangeline sighed, shaking her head. You really are a difficult person to get along with. No wonder you're always alone. That's fine by me. I like it that way. Sylvia frowned, her calm voice carrying a quiet conviction. Whoever is comfortable in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. You're neither, so I'm sure there's a part of you that desires connection. She paused, her gaze steady. Fine. You want a reason, right? Here it is. I stand to gain the self-gratification of saving someone from their solitude. That's what I want. Evangeline smiled faintly at her friend's boldness. Sylvia might have been reserved, but she was far from weak. My reason is the same as I've told you before, Evangeline said. I want you to be my training partner. Leona raised her hand excitedly. Me next. Me next. She tapped her chin in exaggerated thought. What do I want? All right. I want to be your friend, so you'll cook for me. Her gaze shifted to Xander, who had been silently fuming. What about you? Everyone turned to him expectantly. Xander narrowed his eyes, his lips curling in disdain. I can't stand this commoner, especially after hearing what he just said. He's both vile and cunning. I'll stay to keep an eye on him. Damon sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. I couldn't care less what you all want. As he spoke, Damon's shadow perception picked up on a presence approaching their group. The blue-haired figure stopped in front of Xander, bowing his head slightly with an air of practiced loyalty. He spared a glance at the rest of the group before turning his focus to Damon. Grey, he greeted, his tone disdainful but curt. Damon's smirk twisted with cold malice. Marcus! Damon's expression didn't falter. Why the sour expression? Did someone die? Marcus's glare was sharp, his anger palpable as he faced Damon, taking notice of the blindfold over his eyes. Grey, you bastard. I see you still know how to run your mouth. Damon scoffed, crossing his arms with a nonchalant air. And I see you still haven't grown out of that subservient attitude. Just so you know, your Lord and Master Ravenscroft doesn't actually give a damn about you. Marcus's eyes narrowed dangerously, but before he could respond, Xander raised a hand, cutting through the tension. Ignore him. Xander's voice carried authority, though his annoyance with Damon was evident. What's so important that you had to come all the way here when class is about to begin? As Marcus hesitated, Xander stole a quick glance at Evangeline. The subtle action didn't go unnoticed, and Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line as he seemed to grasp the unspoken meaning. After a moment, he bit his lip before speaking, his voice strained. It's Lark. He's been confirmed dead. The air grew heavy. Damon suppressed a smile, his face remaining unreadable, but the others immediately turned their attention to Marcus. Xander, who had been the leader of the group Marcus was part of, frowned deeply. "Ow," he asked, his voice tight. "How'd he die? He was only missing, wasn't he?" Marcus's eyes were red, his voice trembling as he struggled to suppress his tears. "He was missing, but it turns out he went into the woods. A monster managed to get past the Academy's barrier. It attacked him and dragged him beyond the barrier." Evangeline's gaze was sharp as she looked at Marcus. "Beyond the barrier? That's impossible. The barrier wouldn't allow a monster to pass." Sylvia nodded, her calm voice carrying a note of concern. "She's right. That barrier was designed to selectively allow only members of the goddess races to pass. Demons and monsters can't cross it. And if they did, the wards would have triggered an alarm across the Academy." Leona, her eyes flickering with unease, leaned forward. "What kind of monster could it have been?" Marcus's voice cracked as he shook his head. "We don't know. The investigation only found deep claw marks and his pager. Nothing else." Damon's expression remained neutral, but his thoughts were as sharp as a blade. So they've finally decided to stop hiding Lark's death. I wonder what story the Academy fed his family. No matter. As long as no one finds out I killed him, I should be safe. Xander's calm demeanor was betrayed by the clenching of his fists. Through his shadow perception, Damon could sense the faint tremble in Xander's hands. "He's holding in," Damon mused. "Should I act concerned or indifferent?" Xander took a deep breath, his voice measured but tinged with sadness. "I see. We should send our condolences to his family. As for the monster, I'm sure the Academy will hunt it down." Damon frowned slightly at Xander's words. Of course, the Academy won't sit idle. They still have their pride to uphold. Poor monsters beyond the barrier will be paying the price for this. Marcus sniffed, wiping at his eyes before speaking again, his voice breaking. "Enjoy new chapters from Empire. And it's Isaac. He's gone missing too." Xander's eyes widened in shock. "What?" He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What do you mean he's gone missing?" Damon's heart thudded for a brief moment, but his remorseless skill activated instantly, dulling his emotions and clearing his mind. Did they uncover the misleading evidence I planted to frame Tobias Morgan after I killed Isaac? Marcus's fists were trembling with suppressed frustration. "I just don't know. This morning, Isaac was gone from his dorm room. It was taken over almost immediately by the student council president, Lilith Astronova. The thing is, no one saw him leave, and the last person with him was Tobias." Damon furrowed his brow as though in thought, but his mind churned with calculations. Lilith Astronova. Of course, she's onto me. Why else would she act so decisively? She's clearly trying to pounce on this situation. That's fine. I left plenty of evidence to ensure Isaac's death points to Tobias. The tear-soaked pillow I used to suffocate him should be damning enough. Sylvia's sharp gray eyes narrowed as she crossed her arms. "What exactly are you implying?" Marcus held his head in his hands, the stress clearly taking a toll on him. "I don't know. It's just the student council detained Tobias for questioning, and after that, the Academy's professors got involved. Now he's under house arrest in his dorm room." Marcus's fear was palpable, but Xander shook his head, his expression skeptical. "That doesn't make sense. If he was the last person to see Isaac, questioning him is understandable. But house arrest? That's extreme." Evangeline nodded, her voice tinged with worry. "You're right. Unless the Academy suspects him of more than just knowing something. They must think he's involved." Leona's gaze shifted to Damon, her expression questioning. "Why would they think he's a suspect, Damon?" Damon sighed dramatically, feigning exasperation. "This stupid girl. I was trying to stay out of this." Turning to her, he responded calmly. "It's because they suspect him, or they found incriminating evidence. They're most likely trying to get a confession out of him." Marcus's glare was fiery as he snapped. "Shut up. Tobias would never hurt Isaac." Damon raised a brow, his tone sharp. "Right. And you all wouldn't try to kill someone and leave their body in a ravine, would you?" The reminder of their past actions silenced Marcus. His lips pressed into a thin line, his rage subdued by guilt. Xander's eyes darted between Marcus and Damon before he asked, "Do they have any evidence against him?" Marcus hesitated, his fists clenched as he lowered his head. They found Isaac's pager with a transaction receipt. It showed that he transferred all his money to Tobias's account. The room also had signs of struggle. 2 cups were found, one with traces of poison. The investigators believed Tobias drugged him, but his body was never found. Damon suppressed the urge to grin, his inner thoughts cold and calculated. Good thing I tampered with more than just the pager. Adding traces of the paralyzing agent to the cup was a stroke of genius. Leona's eyes narrowed as she studied Damon. "So, Tobias killed his friend?" Damon shrugged nonchalantly. "Who knows? That's for the investigation to decide." Marcus's glare returned, tears glistening in his eyes. "He didn't kill him. I can vouch for Tobias." Damon tilted his head slightly, a thin smile forming on his lips. "But you weren't there, were you?" Xander's fury broke through his usual calm demeanor. "Shut up, commoner. We don't need your bitter remarks right now." Sylvia chimed in, her voice firm yet gentle. "At least try to be sensitive, Damon." The raven perched nearby suddenly cawed. "Caw! Evil! Evil!" Damon sighed, dismissing the bird's cry with a wave of his hand. "Well, his body hasn't been found. Maybe he's still alive." Sylvia's expression softened, and she nodded. "That's the most thoughtful thing I've heard you say today." Evangeline followed with a hopeful tone. "Yes, it's possible he's still alive." Xander nodded, his determination to remain optimistic evident. Damon, however, sneered internally. "Too bad. Isaac is dead and devoured. They won't even find a body. And this is just the beginning." The classroom murmurs grew quieter, and Damon's senses sharpened. Expanding his shadow perception, he swept the room and noted the faint silhouette of the professor's shadow as he entered. The professor, an elderly man with a kind smile, clapped his hands to gather their attention. "Let us begin. Take your seats, everyone." Marcus reluctantly moved to a seat near Xander, his movements slow and heavy. Damon sighed as he looked down at his shadow. "Now, who do I take out next?" White of his beard, perched on his nose were glasses that glinted faintly in the dim light, while his usual white robe flowed around him, giving him an almost ethereal presence. Damon watched him through the shadows cast in the room, his perception allowing him to see the gentle aura the man exuded. Chrome's demeanor was a rarity among the professors. Unlike the others, who openly looked down on Damon for being the weakest student, Chrome had always treated him with respect. To Damon, this was made even more remarkable by the fact that Chrome, like him, was a commoner. The professor began the class by recounting the discussion from the previous session. He spoke of philosophies and theories, praising the students' engagement and intellectual curiosity. Damon let the words wash over him, barely registering them. He hadn't been in the last class, so he had no idea what they had discussed. His mind was too preoccupied with his plans. As he sat there, his thoughts churned. "Who do I kill next?" he mused, his blindfolded eyes facing forward. "And who do I frame this time?" The inclusion of Lilith Astronova in the investigation troubled him. It was clear that she wouldn't believe Tobias was guilty of killing Isaac, which means she'll keep digging, looking for evidence about what really happened to Isaac. Damon smiled faintly, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "She's probably trying to clear Tobias." That's perfect. If no one expects him to be the next target, then Tobias becomes the ideal scapegoat again. He glanced downward at the shadow cast beneath him, which had been behaving like an ordinary shadow since he left his dorm. "I don't need to sneak into the judgment halls where Tobias is under house arrest. I just need to lure him out." Damon's plan began to crystallize as he tapped the desk rhythmically. "I still have 2 days before Anvil finishes making my weapons. My shadow energy is at 200 now, so I can last a little longer without feeding it, but I've got at most 4 days left." His heart steeled itself against hesitation. "Within these 4 days, I'll need a plan to lure out Tobias and kill him before Lilith uncovers the truth." A faint flutter caught his attention, though he didn't turn his head. Something hopped onto his desk. Without needing to look, Damon knew it was the raven Sylvia had made him adopt as a pet. The bird sat there silently, its beady eyes glinting with intelligence. It had been unusually quiet since the class began, as if aware of its surroundings. Damon's gaze flicked toward it briefly. This bird, it might actually come in handy. I just thought of a feasible but dangerous plan. While Damon silently plotted, the professor had stopped talking, his gaze now directed at him. Unaware of the now silent classroom, Damon remained lost in his thoughts. A sharp nudge from Sylvia's elbow jolted him. Startled, Damon looked up, his calm expression masking the irritation bubbling within. Xander's scoff was loud enough to catch his attention, though the noble didn't bother speaking. The mocking smirk on Xander's face said it all. Damon turned to Sylvia, his brow furrowing. She muttered something under her breath, subtly gesturing toward her eyes. Realization dawned. The professor must have called him out for wearing a blindfold in class. Without standing, Damon turned his head toward Professor Chrome, his voice steady and composed. I apologize for any distraction I've caused. Chrome shook his head, his tone as gentle as his aura. That's quite all right. Young people often have much on their minds. Professor Chrome stroked his beard thoughtfully, his gaze resting on Damon. I was curious as to why you would wear a blindfold to class. I hope I didn't make you disinterested in learning. Damon shook his head with a calm expression. Your next chapter is on Empire. Not at all, Professor. While I may be wearing a blindfold, I assure you my vision has never been better. Chrome's eyebrows rose in mild surprise, and he chuckled softly. Ho ho ho. I see. In that case, care to tell me what's written on the board? Without turning his head, Damon tapped into his shadow perception, effortlessly gleaning the contents of the board. His voice was steady, devoid of hesitation. My philosophy. Chrome nodded in satisfaction. I see. It seems you can see after all. Very well. Picking up an old, worn book from his desk, Chrome continued. In our last class, we discussed individual philosophies. It seems you were absent, so before we proceed, why don't you share your philosophy with the class? Damon scanned the silent room, feeling the weight of the students' attention on him. His absence over the past 2 days had clearly not gone unnoticed. I have no philosophy, Professor, he said flatly. Chrome shook his head, his expression kind yet firm. Everyone has a philosophy, a principle they live by, something that shapes their lives. It plays an important role in their magic and even influences the type of class they awaken, from the 1st to the 7th class advancement. He gestured toward a student nearby. Evangeline, who is seated with you, has a philosophy shaped by strength and justice that will most likely influence the class she awakens. Turning his gaze back to Damon, Chrome's eyes gleamed with curiosity. So what is your philosophy, Damon? This is important for your future. Of course, this is just my personal curiosity, but let me offer you an incentive. If your philosophy is interesting enough, I'll grant you full credits for all my classes, not just this one. I'll even overlook your absences from the past 2 days. Damon bit his lip, torn between silence and opportunity. Being on academic probation, he needed every credit he could get. The stakes were too high to ignore. He put on a thoughtful expression, sifting through his memories for an answer. Something that shaped his life. His thoughts drifted to an epitaph he had stumbled upon years ago in the woods. Those words had been his springboard, his acceptance of life's cruel realities. Finally, Damon sighed. It's meaningless. Chrome frowned slightly. That's disappointing. I'll have to deduct half your credits for refusing to answer. But Damon wasn't finished. The word lingered in his mind as he relived the harrowing moments of his life. His parents, dead in a senseless war. His relatives betraying him. His village casting him out. He and his sister had starved, scraping by in a world that seemed designed to crush them. Damon clenched his fists under the desk. He remembered nearly ending his life, running from death for a place to survive, and watching adults, one after another, reveal their selfish motives. Just when he found hope, it shattered. His sister fell ill with a chronic, incurable disease. Life was meaningless, hopeless, cruel. And yet, even in that abyss, Damon had refused to surrender. The despair didn't consume him. Instead, it forged him. His voice was cold and tired, a sound that shouldn't have belonged to someone so young. Life is not a gift, but a curse. We are dealt hands we never asked for, forced to play roles we never agreed to. Those who concede early fade quietly, but those who stand, bloodied and battered, rewrite the rules. I don't kneel to designs I didn't create. My life is my own, my pain my teacher, and my will the only God I answer to. Even as I face my end, covered in blood and tears, I will spit in the face of the goddess of fate. The goddess can have me when she's earned me. His words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. He clenched his fist, his shadow writhing faintly beneath the desk. The room erupted into murmurs. Did he just disparage the goddess? That's blasphemy. As he lost his mind, the Temple Inquisition will take him for this. Outside the classroom, Lilith Astronova, the student council president, froze in place. She had been walking past the room, but stopped, her wide eyes fixed on Damon through the door's narrow window. What arrogance, what madness, she muttered. Is he insane? Inside, Professor Chrome's reaction was unexpected. He chuckled softly, then broke into a hearty laugh, stroking his beard with genuine amusement. What an interesting philosophy, he said, his eyes gleaming with approval. Without a doubt, your first-class advancement will awaken to something unique, something unlike any other. That I am sure of. The murmurs grew louder, students exchanging shocked glances, but Damon blinked, caught off guard by the professor's high appraisal. For a moment, his cold resolve faltered, replaced by the faintest flicker of surprise. Damon wasn't the only one surprised by Professor Chrome's high appraisal. For the people of Aetherus, class advancement was not just a measure of power, it was a defining milestone in life. Every individual had the potential to awaken up to 7 classes, and with each class advancement, their rank and power increased exponentially. The first class advancement was pivotal. It determined the foundation of an individual's growth and could be any class: mage, knight, assassin, healer, and many others. These were the more common classes, shared by countless individuals across the world. However, there was a rare phenomenon known as a unique class, where an individual awakened to a class that was entirely their own. The factors that influenced class advancement were numerous: philosophy, birth, lineage, ambition, faith, desires, emotions, and even the unpredictable hand of fate. Of these, one's philosophy and mindset were among the most critical. It was for this reason that Professor Chrome had given Damon such a high appraisal. With a philosophy as radical and defiant as Damon's, his first-class advancement would almost certainly be unique, assuming he ever awakened to a class at all. Class awakening was no easy feat. It was a trial of will, determination, fortitude, and talent, often beyond the reach of the weak. Meanwhile, the classroom buzzed with murmurs. The Temple Inquisition will definitely come for him with that mindset. Who does he think he is to say such things about the goddess? Professor Chrome raised his hand, silencing the noise with a calm yet firm tone. That is enough, everyone. I do not think his words are blasphemous at all. He did not insult the goddess. After all, in the Book of Fate, the goddess herself said, and I quote, "To love fate is to defy fate. Only then can you be your truest self." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of those words settled over the students. Sylvia, seated beside Damon, nodded in agreement. Yes, that's true. The goddess only acknowledges those who strive to make their own path. So, I don't think it's blasphemous at all. Evangeline added, her voice steady. I don't think the temple will concern itself with something so trivial. Xander, however, scoffed from his seat. If the temple took this wretch now, it'd be better for all of us in the goddess races. But I suppose you're right, he said with a venomous smirk. Despite his insult, the class seemed to lean toward agreement with the top 3 students. The murmurs softened, indicating that most were inclined to accept their reasoning. Damon sneered faintly, his lips curling in disdain. He honestly didn't give a damn what they thought. Where was the goddess when he was suffering? While it was true that he invoked her name often, it wasn't out of faith. It was nothing more than a habit his mother, Aether Grey, had ingrained in him as a child, a hollow ritual that held no meaning anymore. Find adventures on Empire. Professor Crome regarded Damon with a spark of intrigue in his eyes. Why don't we analyze Damon's philosophy? Perhaps we can guess what class he might awaken to, he suggested. The room fell into a tense silence, save for Marcus, who, despite his grief over losing Lark and Isaac, couldn't resist sneering. Assuming this trash even has the talent to reach the first-class advancement. Professor Crome smiled faintly, undeterred by the hostility. Do not underestimate human potential, he replied before turning to the board. He wrote down Damon's earlier words with slow, deliberate strokes. Now, then, who wants to interpret young Damon's philosophy? Damon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling awkward about being the center of attention. Still, he sighed, resigned to the situation. Crome was likely going to follow through with the full credits he'd promised, so Damon decided to endure it. Two hands shot up simultaneously, Sylvia's and Evangeline's. Crome nodded towards Sylvia, who rose hesitantly. Her gaze flickered briefly to Damon, who sat beside her wearing his usual blindfold and maintaining a calm, almost serene expression. His philosophy is a little crazy, she began, her voice unsure. And it sounds so sad. The first part, he sees life as a curse forced upon us since no one asked to be born. He rejects the meaning of life altogether. She bit her lip nervously, stealing another glance at Damon, whose demeanor hadn't shifted in the slightest. He desires freedom through rejecting conformity, she continued. He rejects roles and designs imposed by fate, society, or even the goddess, which, sounds almost blasphemous. Xander's voice cut through her explanation with a sharp sneer. That doesn't sound blasphemous. It is blasphemous. Don't try to cover for him. Sylvia fell silent for a moment, her expression tight as she glanced toward Crome for reassurance. That's all I have to say, she muttered before quickly sitting down. Crome turned his attention to Evangeline. Do you have something to add? Evangeline hesitated, her sun-marked eyes lingering on Damon before she spoke. I'll continue where she left off, she said softly. Damon isn't bothered by pain. He sees it as a learning opportunity, something to push his growth. His pain becomes his ally, shaping his will and identity. Her voice wavered slightly, and she sat down abruptly, unwilling to continue. The more she analyzed it, the more twisted Damon's philosophy seemed to her. Xander leaned forward, his expression scornful. Let me give my honest opinion. Someone who refuses to conform has no rules. What wouldn't he do? The act of spitting in the face of the goddess of fate represents ultimate defiance. If he can spit on the goddess, then what do the rules of man mean to him? Morality, kindness, love, honor. How is he any different from a wild beast? Or a monster? A sinner? Crome shook his head, his expression calm yet firm. Understandable, but his philosophy only rejects rules he didn't make. If he creates rules that restrict himself to only kindness and righteousness, does that not make him a saint rather than a sinner? Xander, I hope you realize that human rules are transient. What was considered righteous 1,000 years ago might be viewed as evil now. Take human sacrifices, for example. Once, they were seen as the ultimate righteousness. Now, they are regarded as barbaric. Turning back to Damon, Crome continued. His philosophy is neither cruel nor evil. I would argue it is kind. If I were to name it, I would call it radical individualism, where the will of one takes precedence over the beliefs of many. Behind his blindfold, Damon's eyes widened in slight surprise. Someone was defending him. That was new. He wasn't used to anyone standing up for him, and the unexpected support stirred something faint in him, a flicker of warmth. His mind drifted briefly to the kind hunter, Carmen, who had once offered him a glimmer of genuine compassion. Maybe, just maybe, genuine kindness is real, he thought. But he quickly shook his head, dismissing the notion as foolish. As if, for the next few minutes, the professor encouraged the class to speculate about what type of class Damon might awaken to. Naturally, no one suggested he would awaken a righteous class. Bandit, thief, heretic. murmured several students, their voices dripping with disdain. One particularly obnoxious classmate went so far as to suggest, maybe he'll awaken as a demon lord and get killed by a hero of the goddess races. The class erupted in laughter, but Damon's lips tightened. He didn't find the part about being killed amusing in the slightest. Some were of the opinion that Damon would never reach a first-class advancement at all, deeming him too weak to achieve it. With a pitiful mana level of 30, what can he possibly do? Damon kept his expression impassive, even as the mocking continued. He was used to it. Professor Chrome, however, didn't dwell on Damon for long. He shifted the conversation to the philosophies of other students in the class. Xander, unsurprisingly, had a philosophy grounded in honor. His classmates speculated he would awaken to a righteous class, and some even dubbed him the Raven Hero, a nod to his family name, Ravenscroft. Evangeline's philosophy centered on justice, leading to guesses she might awaken as a light paladin or judge. Sylvia's belief in the importance of sharing knowledge led others to imagine she would awaken as a sage or scholar. Leona, with her steadfast belief in strength, was expected to awaken as a warrior or even a warlord. Speculations about their future classes ran wild, but no one doubted that they would achieve a first-class advancement. It was almost as if their success was a foregone conclusion. The stark contrast between their confidence and Damon's precarious position wasn't lost on him. But he didn't feel left out. This was how things had always been for him. He was an outsider, unable to truly connect with others. Professor Chrome, meanwhile, seemed thrilled by the engagement in his class. The old man smiled from ear to ear, radiating the warmth of a kind grandfather. Damon couldn't help but respect him, even if he didn't fully trust the world Chrome represented. Stroking his beard, the professor let out a laugh as he turned to Damon. Your journey continues at Empire. Well, young man, I suppose it's time to keep my end of the agreement. You've earned full credits for all my classes. Damon nodded silently, appreciating the rare instance of fairness in his life. Chrome resumed his lecture, using the little time left to wrap up the day's topic before they all moved on to their next class. At the back of the room, Lilith Astronova had been lingering near the door, silent but watchful. Her green eyes gleamed with amusement as a small smile curved her lips. As the class ended, she turned and walked away, her voice a soft murmur that only she could hear. Damon Grey, you still haven't filled out the paperwork for the equipment you took. It seems I'll have to punish you. Damon didn't know that Lilith Astronova had been outside the class, watching him. He was too absorbed in the class to notice, and Lilith remained just outside the range of his shadow perception. For the moment, everything seemed to be progressing without interruption, and Damon found himself in a somewhat good mood, his mind distracted by the lively discussion in the room. Caw, caw. The raven cawed mildly, drawing Damon's attention. He glanced at the bird, his thoughts already turning. I wonder if it'll be useful. If not, I'll just get rid of the damn bird. His gaze shifted to Sylvia, the white-haired elf sitting across from him. She was completely focused on the class, paying no mind to his presence. Damon couldn't see her clearly with his eyes closed, and his shadow perception only revealed a world in stark black and white. Even so, there was something familiar about her, some small similarities that reminded him of his sister. Can you recommend any books or share any knowledge on beast taming? Sylvia blinked in surprise, her eyes darting toward his blindfolded face. You want to learn about beast taming? I'm not a tamer. Damon nodded, unfazed. I see. I suppose I'll just have to eat the damn bird. The raven, Croft, wasn't pleased by the mention of being eaten. Caw-caw. Evil, evil. Sylvia waved her hands hastily, panic flashing across her face. No, don't do that. I was trying to say, I'm not a tamer, but I know a thing or two. I learned some things from rangers and Iorvas, so I can share that. In fact, let me help you train him. No need to eat him. Damon suppressed a smile, his lips barely curling into a smirk. I suppose using the bird's life as leverage worked. She's quite gullible despite her vast knowledge. Very well then, we can start tomorrow. He could feel the raven hopping around on the desk, its beady eyes fixed on him. Damon could almost hear its angry cawing in his mind. If this works, then I can proceed with my first plan. If not, I'll have to adjust it. Either way, in the next few days, I must kill Tobias Morgan before his name gets cleared. But before that, I need another scapegoat. His gaze shifted to Marcus, who appeared somewhat drained, his eyes still red from the grief of losing 2 friends. I have to be more subtle next time. I'll leave something that belongs to Marcus as evidence. That will stir up some chaos. After that, I'll change my pattern completely. Target someone who has nothing to do with me. Damon's mind flickered with the realization that doing so would result in the death of an innocent person. He quickly pushed the thought aside. In this world, no one is innocent. Innocence is lost the moment of birth. From then on, every breath we take is at the price of another life. Even if that life is insignificant. When we eat, something must die. When we walk, we trample on ants and grass. I have no need to feel guilty. This is simply natural selection. His lips parted slightly as he bit them lightly, lost in his thoughts. Beneath him, his shadow stirred, reacting to his mindset. The remorseless skill had deactivated, but Damon felt a strange calm wash over him. He focused on the necessity of his actions, pushing aside any lingering doubts or moral qualms. As the class came to an end, Damon stood, and, as expected, Leona followed him. To his annoyance, the raven flew onto his shoulder, cawing angrily at him. Sylvia trailed behind, still likely worried that Damon might kill the bird. Evangeline followed her, and to no one's surprise, Xander tagged along, with Marcus walking behind him. Damon sighed, sensing their presence through his shadow perception. What a nuisance! A young man walked through the academy halls, a tired expression etched on his pale face. He wore a black blindfold over his eyes, matching the dark shade of his hair. His academy uniform, a black jacket over a white shirt with black pants, was pristine despite the intense physical training earlier. On his chest, a small brooch read probation, a label that seemed to mock his current status. Perched on his shoulder was a raven, its sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. Damon was drained after a long day of rigorous physical and magical exercises. Compared to his classmates, he lagged significantly behind. His refusal to use the system's 5x skill left him at a natural disadvantage, and his shadow was full, denying him the extra stats boost from shadow hunger. The academy uniform is truly impressive, he mused, brushing off a speck of dust from his jacket. Even after hours of strenuous training, the uniform remained intact and immaculate. It was a marvel of magitech, capable of withstanding damage, self-mending, and even cleaning itself. I think I can understand why they're so expensive, he thought, though it did little to improve his mood. It had been a grueling day. The instructors had pushed them through relentless training, and Damon, already at a disadvantage, felt the strain more than anyone else. Still, he had tried to conserve as much energy as possible for his upcoming duel with Xander Ravenscroft. Not that it made a difference. He would have come in last regardless, except perhaps in speed. And all that speed? It was only good for running away. Today had been unusual for Damon. He had spent nearly the entire day with the top students in his class. What amused him was that it wasn't his choice. They had been following him. Even now, they were still with him. Leona, as always, seemed ecstatic. It's almost time for the duel. No wonder you came last at everything today. You must be saving your stamina. I'm sure you didn't even try at all. Damon sneered inwardly. Actually, I did try. I just suck. He kept his expression neutral, knowing Leona would never believe him if he said it aloud. He couldn't exactly explain that his strength was conditional, dependent on how hungry his shadow was. When it was starving, he could rival the top students, his power exploding. But when it wasn't, he was simply the weakest in the class. Evangeline nodded in agreement. The duel isn't a fight, so you must have kept most of your stamina. Sylvia chuckled. Although, you sure know how to act. I was convinced you were actually tired with how much you were gasping for breath. Damon stayed silent, his thoughts simmering. I was tired. Asking us to run that much should be illegal, especially since the rest of you used magic to enhance your strength. Xander scoffed. Whether he's pretending or not will be determined by the outcome of our duel. Marcus sneered, his disdain palpable. He's just going to humiliate himself. He's trash, and I don't get why you all think he has anything going for him. Leona's glare could have cut through steel. Insult my bestie again, and I'll cripple you. Marcus flinched, the venom in her voice unmistakable. Leona's disdain for him stemmed from one simple fact. He was weaker than her. She tolerated Xander's sharp tongue because he had the strength to back it up, but Marcus? He was just an irritant. Xander sighed. That's enough. No need to go after Marcus for having an opinion. Leona's eyes narrowed dangerously. He can keep his opinions to himself. If he speaks again, I'll break his legs. Marcus paled, his face almost as blue as his hair. He knew Leona wasn't one for empty threats. If she said she would break his legs, she would. Damon remained silent, not even sparing a glance at the group. He could see them clearly within the range of his shadow perception, but his focus was elsewhere, on the duel. 500,000 zenny, he thought, his determination stealing. That was the prize for winning, and Damon had no intention of losing. They soon reached their destination, a large vaulted door that loomed ahead like the entrance to some ancient fortress. As the door creaked open, a vast domed room was revealed. It was one of the Academy's renowned training facilities, equipped with all manner of magical technology for honing students' combat skills. This particular space was the designated venue for anti-magic combat. Standing at the center of the room was none other than Professor Cale Blackthorn, his presence radiating a dark and oppressive aura. As they crossed the threshold, Damon's shadow perception immediately caught Cale's distinct energy. It was vastly different from Professor Chrome's. Where Chrome's aura was warm and gentle, Cale's was dark, heavy, and suffocating. Right, his attribute is dark magic, Damon mused, his lips twitching in irritation. Cale Blackthorn's eyes met Damon's with thinly veiled disdain. The sentiment Damon returned in kind. I haven't seen you in class for 2 days, Cale began, his voice dripping with mockery. I assumed you finally took my advice and dropped out. Damon sneered, the corner of his lips curling upward. And give you the satisfaction? I never stooped so low. If you want me gone, Cale, you'll have to kick me out yourself. Evangeline and the others trailing behind Damon were taken aback by his boldness. Speaking so disrespectfully to a professor, especially one as intimidating as Cale Blackthorn, was unthinkable. Yet Damon showed no hesitation, as though the man standing before him didn't hold his academic future in his hands. Cale shook his head, his cold gaze shifting to Evangeline, Sylvia, and Xander. Do you think sucking up to the top students can save you? He sneered. If you do, you're wasting your time. Damon scoffed audibly. Do I look like the type to suck up to anyone? Cale's eyes narrowed dangerously. What wouldn't you do? Your very existence is a disgrace to this academy. Damon bit his lip, a flash of irritation crossing his face. He took a step forward, his voice sharp and unwavering. Were you dropped on your head as a baby, or did your mother just not bother to teach you basic manners? If you're deaf, let me repeat myself, I'm not going anywhere. The room froze. Everyone stared at Damon in disbelief. Leona's golden eyes widened with admiration, her lips parting slightly in awe. Xander looked at Damon as though he had lost his mind, while Evangeline was too stunned to speak. Sylvia, however, appeared visibly anxious, her hands fidgeting nervously at her sides. Cale's expression darkened, his aura growing heavier as his anger simmered beneath the surface. You dare insult me? He hissed, his voice low and threatening. Before the tension could escalate further, Sylvia stepped forward hastily, her voice awkward but placating. Ah, Professor, please forgive him. It's just, Damon's a bit worked up today. He's mentally preparing for his duel with Xander, so he's a little aggressive. Cale's gaze shifted from Sylvia back to Damon, his cold eyes scrutinizing him. He intends to duel while wearing that blindfold? Cale asked with a scoff. Damon chuckled softly, his voice tinged with mockery. I'm just giving the so-called prodigies you think so highly of a handicap, he replied smoothly. Read new chapters at Empire. Kale's lips thinned into a line, his narrowed eyes boring into Damon. Really now? He said slowly. In that case, I'll allow it. I'll even act as the referee for this duel. He turned his gaze toward Xander, his tone suddenly colder. If you destroy him, you automatically pass this class. The magic artillery was originally developed as a weapon during the Demon Wars on the Magic Continent. Over time, however, it was repurposed for training, its deadly potential now serving as a tool to forge capable combatants. This sophisticated magic technology fired projectiles imbued with various elemental attributes. Water was the slowest and easiest to dodge, while light was the fastest and most difficult to counter. The system was designed to push students to adapt to attacks of varying speeds and elements, a skill critical for high-speed battles against demons and monsters. Of course, the magic artillery was just one of many training facilities the Academy boasted. Aether Academy's reputation as the world's premier institution for magical education wasn't without merit. Damon stood before the equipment, his hands clenched at his sides as he took a deep breath. His eyes scanned the array of weapons available, each stronger and more durable than the ones used for sparring. These weren't meant for dueling one another, but rather for deflecting the relentless barrage of the magic artillery. The rules of the duel were straightforward. Last as long as possible while facing the artillery. Dodging, deflecting, erecting barriers, or even tanking the attacks were all valid methods. The difficulty, and thus the points, depended on the attribute chosen for the artillery's projectiles. Light, being the fastest, was the highest setting allowed for first-year students. The weapons laid out were primarily for deflecting the attacks, though shields were also available. However, shields came with a drawback. They had a limited number of hits they could withstand before shattering. Damon's thoughts drifted back to Professor Kale Blackthorn's explanation of the rules. The professor's disdain for him had been palpable, especially when he openly encouraged Xander to obliterate him. What weapon should I choose? Damon mused, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the arsenal again. He could feel the weight of expectation in the room, the unspoken judgment from his peers and Professor Blackthorn alike. But Damon wasn't here to fail, and he certainly wasn't here to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him falter. A broadsword would do, but it was too heavy for fast movement, and Damon didn't have the skill to wield it effectively. A long sword was too thin, its reach wasted on someone like him. He didn't even bother considering blunt weapons. A shield? Out of the question, it would slow him down and, worse yet, had a limit to how many hits it could take. To someone like him, who couldn't conjure barriers with magic, that restriction felt downright unfair. He sighed, his shadow perception scanning the rows of weapons before him. The shapes and forms blurred in his mind until his focus stopped on the short swords. He picked one up, feeling its balance. Maybe I overestimated myself, he thought grimly, shaking his head. No, he couldn't afford doubt, not now. He held the short sword briefly before placing it back. It was an option, if he didn't find anything better. As he moved further down the aisle, his perception caught the faint outline of daggers on a nearby shelf. Most were too thin, useless for deflecting powerful attacks. Just as he turned away in frustration, an unusual distortion flickered at the edge of his perception, a subtle ripple in the shadows. His brows furrowed beneath his black blindfold. He walked toward the source, his fingers brushing against the twin daggers that caught his attention. They felt different. Their weight was perfect, their balance exceptional. But most of all, their edges were wide enough to catch the light, reflecting it like glass. That was what had caused the distortion in his shadow perception. A smirk tugged at Damon's lips. Yes, these will do. They should be able to reflect, or in this case, deflect light. He glanced down at his shadow, the faintest flicker of uncertainty crossing his mind. That is, assuming my theory is correct. If not, I'm about to humiliate myself, but that's fine. I should have at least an 80% chance of pulling this off. And if not, well, I'll use my 15 attribute points to cover my weaknesses. Are you ready, or do you intend to stand there all day? Cale Blackthorn's cold voice cut through Damon's thoughts like a blade. Damon scoffed, turning his head slightly. Your opponent has already chosen his weapon. If you think you can't do this, just admit you're a failure and let us proceed with our regular class. Why would I give you the satisfaction, Professor? Damon replied dryly, his voice calm despite the provocation. Cale's icy glare bore into him, but the professor no longer felt anger, only disdain. After all, Xander Ravenscroft was sure to humiliate this disappointment of a student. The murmurs of the class filled the room, their words sharp and cutting. That Damon guy is insane. It's one thing after another with him. Yeah, but can you blame him? Total loser. He's going to get expelled soon anyway. Might as well act crazy while he still can. If I were a probationary student, my family would disown me. Wearing that mark of shame, I'd rather die. Damon let the insults roll off him. If he'd allowed mere words to break him, he wouldn't have survived this long. But he didn't forget them either. One day, he'd make them eat their words. He twirled the glass-like daggers in his hands, throwing them into the air and catching them effortlessly. Cale's gaze narrowed. Those are falsity daggers. The material is durable but prone to breaking when faced with blunt attribute attacks. Is this your choice? Yes, it is, Damon replied firmly. The professor shook his head, his disappointment evident. Poor judgment, as always. And here I almost had expectations for you. Once again, you disappoint me. Damon said nothing. He didn't need to explain himself. He knew what he was doing. Leona Veilfire rushed up to him, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Your weapon of choice is twin daggers? Damon sneered. If you're here to tell me I made a foolish choice, I suggest you shove it. Leona blinked, taken aback. Why would I think that? You're the second smartest person I know, after Sylvia. His blindfold hid his reaction, but her words caught him off guard. I see. Good to know I'm only second, he muttered sarcastically. Leona didn't catch the remark, smiling warmly. Beat him and make me dinner. Damon raised an eyebrow. You're so sure I can beat him? Huh? And how is me making you dinner a reward for me? Leona ignored his sarcasm, her confidence in him oddly endearing despite his doubts about calling her friend. Caw-caw. Evil, evil. Damon turned at the sound, finding Sylvia standing nearby, her mischievous smile as sharp as ever. You must be really confident if you're already making promises to Leona, Sylvia teased. I didn't make any promises, Damon shot back. It's just a transaction she's paying for. Sylvia grinned. In that case, how much to include me as well? Before Damon could respond, Professor Cale's voice rang out cold and commanding. Combatants, step up. Xander and Damon approached the field, standing before a flight of stairs leading to the magic artillery. Choose an attribute, Cale instructed. Xander smirked, turning to Damon. I'll let you choose. Think of it as a handicap for the weakest. Damon sneered, stepping up to the metal dial. Famous last words. His hand hovered over the settings for a moment before he turned the dial to its maximum. Stay updated through Empire. In that case, I select the highest attribute, light. The class fell silent. A beat passed before the room erupted into murmurs, their disbelief palpable. Did he just pick light? He's insane. No one's ever lasted long against light as a first year. Your next chapter awaits on Empire. Does he even want to stay in the academy? This is suicide. He's going to fail spectacularly. The murmurs of Damon's classmates filled the air, dripping with mockery and disbelief. He ignored them, focusing instead on the dial in front of him. The quiet hum of the mechanism confirmed his choice. Light. Professor Cale Blackthorn stepped forward, his cold, grim expression cutting through the room's chatter like a blade. Light, is it? Truly, your overconfidence knows no bounds. Or perhaps this is your way of ensuring your failure is as spectacular as possible. His words drew laughter from the class, the kind that sought to humiliate rather than amuse. Damon clenched the twin glass-like daggers in his hands, their reflective surfaces catching the room's brightness. That wasn't even funny, Damon thought, shaking his head. Strength is forged in solitude, not in the approval of others. Xander Ravenscroft, his opponent, chuckled darkly. The sword in Xander's hand glinted menacingly under the lights. I certainly hope you don't die from those beams of light. Light magic is the fastest type of magic. You will fail. Damon scoffed, a smirk tugging at his lips. Someone sounds scared. Xander's eyes narrowed, his voice laced with venom. I'm only scared you'll be too dead to apologize after I win. Damon knew death was a very real possibility. Aether Academy wasn't a place for the weak-hearted. Training here, both inside and beyond its walls, often came with casualties. It was an unspoken reality every student had to accept. Pain and failure are the price of power, Damon said, his tone calm and resolute. Xander let out a low, derisive chuckle. Then you will feel them both. Descending the flight of stairs into the arena, Xander's movements were measured and confident. Damon followed, his steps steady despite the weight of countless eyes bearing down on him. The arena was vast and well-lit, its walls lined with magic artillery designed to test the limits of any who dared enter. Damon scanned the room through his shadow perception, feeling the spaces where the beams would fire. Above, a transparent glass panel revealed his classmates peering down at him, their faces alight with anticipation. Damon took a deep breath, his grip tightening on the daggers. Their surface, almost too fragile in appearance, seemed inadequate for the challenge ahead. He furrowed his brow beneath the black blindfold, trying to quiet his doubts. This dagger doesn't seem durable, he admitted to himself. But it'll have to do. He adjusted his stance, the daggers catching the light as he steadied his breathing. What works matters more than what's expected, he muttered under his breath. The hum of magic filled the air, signaling the start of the trial. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first strike. Damon could feel Xander's presence not far from him through his shadow perception, a faint yet unmistakable pulse in the monochrome world his skill revealed. I'm about to go up against one of the strongest students in my year. If I win, I get money. Lots of it. Damon bit his lip, his heart pounding as if trying to escape his chest. The weight of dozens of stairs pressed down on him like a suffocating shroud. He clenched his fists. No one cared about him. Not his classmates, not the academy, not even the professor overseeing this trial. He was utterly alone. A faint static sound crackled from the corners of the room, pulling Damon's attention. Professor Kale's voice followed, cold and detached, echoing through the space. Now, then, you both know the rules. This is not a game. There's a very real possibility of death in the magic artillery room. While it is used for training, it was originally designed as a weapon. Absolutely do not use your magic attribute to attack each other, nor your fists. The professor paused, allowing his words to sink in. If you feel you are in danger, voice your surrender, and a magic circle hidden beneath your feet will teleport you out. Now then, you may begin. Damon's heart pounded in his chest, the sound loud in his ears. He took a deep breath, but the fear didn't dissipate. His shadow perception alerted him as small partitions in the walls opened and magic began gathering within them. The spatial awareness granted by his skill allowed him to sense every beam preparing to fire, but that didn't banish the fear in his mind. If he wasn't careful, one wrong move could be his last. As that thought crossed his mind, something shifted. His fear and doubt ebbed away, replaced by a calm, calculating clarity. His remorseless skill had activated. Right. One of its activation conditions is for me to be in battle. I suppose this counts. Damon's expression turned cold, his focus sharpening. If I don't fight for myself, no one will. The first beam of light shot toward him, aimed directly at his forehead. Damon felt it through his shadow perception, the way the beam distorted the shadows around it. He tilted his head slightly to the side, letting the beam pass harmlessly by and strike the ground behind him. He tightened his grip on his daggers. As I thought, shadow perception allows me to predict the trajectory of light. Even if it's fast, I can see it beforehand. 2 more beams fired in quick succession. Damon sidestepped both effortlessly, his movements fluid and precise. He could sense the surprised reactions of his classmates above, watching through the transparent glass. The world doesn't define me, I define myself. The beams increased in number, now firing 10 at once. Damon twisted his body, ducked, and sidestepped, avoiding every one of them. His movements were a seamless dance of precision and grace. He narrowed his eyes as more partitions opened on the walls. This isn't going to be as easy as I thought. The beams surged to 20, all aimed at him with deadly precision. Damon broke into a run, his feet carrying him swiftly around the room. The beams struck the ground behind him, each one narrowly missing its mark. Despite dodging everything so far, Damon knew this wasn't sustainable. The objective wasn't just to survive, it was to outlast Xander. He shifted some of his focus toward his opponent. Xander had conjured 2 shields of gravity magic, which hovered around him like protective orbs, deflecting the beams effortlessly as he moved across the room. Damon sneered at the sight. Well, that's not fair. I can't use that type of magic. Does his gravity attribute give him an advantage against light? Or is he just that good? His mind, now cold and analytical under the influence of remorseless, broke the situation down. I need to find a way to deal with him before I tire out. This is only the first wave, so I'll hold off on using my 5x skill and attribute point for now. A beam of light streaked toward Damon from his right. He tilted his head just in time to avoid it, then sidestepped another. In one fluid motion, he stepped onto the wall and propelled himself behind Xander, positioning himself just outside the radius of the gravity shields. A smirk tugged at Damon's lips. That's a nice barrier you've got there. Mind sharing the wealth with a lowly commoner? Xander turned, his cold gaze locking onto Damon. You dare? Damon chuckled, his voice laced with mockery. Not breaking any rules here. Why are you getting angry? From a glass observation deck, the class watched intently as Damon and Xander faced off. At first, they were stunned that Damon could even dodge the light magic attacks from the magic artillery. Why is he running around like that? One student muttered. Isn't it obvious? He can't even use the weakest barrier spells. Another sneered. Right, with a mana pool of only 30, he can't cast anything substantial, someone else chimed in. With all that running around, he'll tire himself out soon enough, added another voice, the tone dripping with disdain. I'm surprised he can dodge at all while wearing a blindfold, one student remarked, the skepticism in their voice clear. The group continued their offhand comments, mocking Damon's apparent disadvantage, until suddenly, Damon shifted his strategy. He sprinted toward Xander, who stood protected by 2 layers of gravity barriers. What is he doing now? Someone asked, leaning closer to the glass. To their collective surprise, Damon darted behind Xander, using the other boy as a shield. As the beams of light from the magic artillery increased in both frequency and intensity, Damon remained in Xander's shadow, positioning himself so that Xander had no choice but to absorb the attacks from one side. Xander moved, tried to evade the barrage, but Damon matched his movements step for step, ensuring he stayed protected. That has to be cheating. He's blatantly taking advantage of Xander, one student exclaimed. That scum has no honor, another hissed. Yeah, what a coward, someone else echoed, their disgust evident. Sylvia, standing apart from the others, gently stroked the beak of the raven perched on her shoulder. Her piercing gaze remained fixed on the scene below. That's not cheating, she said, her voice calm but firm. He's still acting within the rules. As long as he doesn't attack Xander with his attribute or fists, everything is fair game. The murmurs continued, but Evangeline, standing nearby, appeared more thoughtful. She rested her chin on her hand, watching Damon closely. I'm more impressed he can dodge light magic at all, she said softly. But he seems slower now. Back when he fought me, he was faster, and his skills seemed sharper. Leona, her golden eyes locked on Damon, nodded in agreement. Yeah, he was stronger when he fought me too. But, it feels like he's holding back this time. Evangeline nodded. Yes, it does seem that way. I imagine he doesn't want to show his full power. Sylvia narrowed her eyes as she continued to study Damon. Is there a reason why he can't fight at full power? Is he holding back deliberately, or are there conditions to his strength? There was something about Damon Grey that unsettled her. His shadow, darker and deeper than any she had seen before, seemed almost alive, shrouding him in an aura of mystery. She glanced at the raven perched on her shoulder, its beady eyes reflecting her curiosity. "Damon Grey, who are you really?" Inside the arena, Damon's forehead glistened with beads of sweat. The space around him was alive with movement, tens of small beams of light magic shooting at unpredictable angles. "I need to boost my stats with 5x, but which one?" Damon's thoughts raced. Endurance will let me last longer. Speed will let me move faster. Agility will give me better maneuverability. As he deliberated, he felt the subtle shift in the arena through his shadow perception. The ground and walls were beginning to transform, their surfaces becoming smooth and reflective like mirrors. This isn't good. His jaw tightened. The light will start bouncing off the walls. It'll be harder to dodge. Damon huffed a breath, determination etched on his face. At least he wasn't the only one tiring. Xander Ravenscroft, his opponent, was drenched in sweat, his face twisted in irritation. He spun and shifted the two gravity barriers surrounding him, using them to block the relentless light attacks. Damon's lips curled into a cold smile. "Looks like you're having a hard time, lover boy. Your crush is about to watch you get humiliated." Xander's eyes narrowed, his face a visage of barely contained rage. "Damn you, commoner. Have you never fought a battle with honor?" Damon sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Honor doesn't belong on the battlefield. To me, life is war. And in war, I don't need honor." Xander growled and rolled across the ground, using one of his barriers as a springboard. He launched himself into the air, raising his sword to deflect a beam of light. The attack redirected, bouncing off the mirror-like surface of the ground and shooting toward Damon. Reacting instantly, Damon swung one of the glass-like daggers he carried, redirecting the light beam into another direction. The arena seemed alive, chaotic with the ricocheting beams of magic. The light artillery suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence. Both combatants stood panting, adrenaline coursing through their veins. A static crackle filled the air as the professor's voice echoed through the arena. "The first phase has ended. The next phase is more dangerous. The attacks will be more lethal. You are free to forfeit now. Death is a very real possibility." Damon didn't react. Any unnecessary emotions were suppressed by his remorseless skill, leaving his mind calm, analytical, and focused entirely on the fight. Even so, deep within, he acknowledged the danger. "The 5x skill only multiplies what I have left. If I exhaust myself now, there won't be anything to multiply." He checked his stats, his mind calculating his next move. HP 50-50, mana 90-90, strength 9, agility 17 plus 5, speed 35 plus 10, endurance 10, class shadow 180, shadow hunger levels 3%, shadow level 2, condition shadow is full, attributes umbra, skills 5x, remorseless shadow perception, locked. He used his 15 attribute points, allocating 10 to speed and 5 to agility. It pained him not to boost mana, but he knew his 5x skill could compensate in a pinch. Maybe he could even buy mana crystals and feed them to his shadow later. Power coursed through his body as his joints felt nimbler, his movements lighter. The sensation was warm, invigorating. "This will do for now," he thought. Damon had already decided which stat to amplify with 5x. That would be his trump card. Professor Kale gave them a minute to catch their breath. Despite his cold demeanor, a flicker of worry crossed his face. "Are you two ready?" the professor asked. Xander raised his sword, summoning 7 barriers that floated protectively around him. His movements were steady, his expression determined. Damon, blindfolded but seeing through his shadows, furrowed his brows. "This guy's good. No, he's amazing. To have the mana and skill to create so many barriers. Continue your adventure with Empire." His teeth clenched. "I can't lose to someone like him. Never." Damon raised his sword to signal he was ready. Xander scoffed. "Not going to create any barriers?" Damon shook his head. He didn't know how to create barriers, and even if he did, he wouldn't need them. Against you, I don't need them, he replied coldly. Before Xander could respond, a large beam of light shot out from the walls. It was faster than any previous attack, moving so quickly that Damon barely twisted his waist in time to dodge. The beam ricocheted off the walls, shattering one of Xander's barriers instantly. Xander paled, his confidence shaken. But he wasn't the only one stunned. Despite his calm demeanor, Damon's mind reeled. That could have killed me. Damon took deep, jagged breaths, his chest rising and falling steadily as he studied Xander's paling face. Outwardly, his expression was calm, but his shadow perception betrayed the stark truth. Being able to sense the light beam's trajectories didn't mean he could always react in time. A prickly sensation crawled over his skin, accompanied by a cold dread that sank deep into his chest. He recognized this feeling all too well. It was the sensation of death looming near, a stark reminder that he could die at any moment. He should have been afraid. He should have considered forfeiting, but his remorseless skill dulled such thoughts, showing him a singular path forward. Victory was the quickest way to earn the money he desperately needed, to give his sister a chance at a better life, to pay for her medical care. Death isn't going to stop me, he thought resolutely. With that, he pointed his glass daggers toward Xander, taking a battle stance. His breathing steadied, his heart calmed, and his mind became void of hesitation. No hesitation in action, no pause for regret. This was the philosophy of the remorseless skill. The arena brightened suddenly, tens of beams of light magic surging through the mirrored space. Damon felt the distortions they caused to the shadows, but they were moving far too fast. Reacting to all of them was impossible. His only choice was to focus entirely on the beams closest to him. Sidestepping one beam, he spun around, slashing at another with one of his daggers. The blade connected, and he felt the impact ripple through his arm. It was almost like striking a solid object. He staggered briefly, but didn't stay still. He had boosted his speed earlier, and now he used it to his full advantage. Darting across the arena, he wove between the beams, his glass daggers slashing and deflecting the relentless attacks as they ricocheted across the room. But even with his enhanced speed, he was barely holding on. The beams increased in number and ferocity, forcing him to move faster and faster. Xander wasn't faring much better. He ran with his sword in hand, several gravity barriers floating around him. However, cracks spiderwebbed across their surfaces, and each light beam that struck them either broke or further weakened the barriers. Sweat poured down Xander's face as he strained to recreate the barriers each time one shattered. His focus was split between maintaining his defenses and avoiding the beams. Glancing at Damon, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of surprise. How is that commoner able to move so fast? No, it's not just speed. He's anticipating the light magic attacks. But how? Xander rolled to the side, slashing at a beam coming at him from an angle. His movements were sharp but calculated. However, there was more to his technique than skill alone. Unbeknownst to Damon, Xander was using his gravity magic. Each slash wasn't purely physical. He manipulated the gravitational pull around his blade, subtly drawing the beams toward him and ensuring they collided with his sword. But I can't sense any mana from his daggers, Xander thought, his brows furrowing. How can someone who hasn't even reached their first-class advancement deflect light magic without any enchantments? His musings were cut short as one of his barriers shattered before he could reposition it. A stray beam grazed his arm, and he stumbled, a sharp groan escaping his lips as pain flared through his body. The barrier had absorbed most of the attack, sparing him from a fatal blow, but the heat of the magic left his skin scorched. The scent of burning flesh filled the air, mixing with the acrid smell of sweat. Xander's grip on his sword tightened as he steadied himself, his breathing ragged, but his resolve unwavering. I can't lose to that commoner. Not today. Never. Damon was running out of breath. His joints ached, his muscles screamed in protest, and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. But despite the strain on his body, his mind remained calm. Through his shadow perception, he caught sight of Xander stumbling. A cold smile spread across his lips. I suppose it's time to make my move. He tightened his grip on the twin glass daggers. He hadn't been slashing mindlessly. Each strike had been calculated. Over time, he'd been learning how to control the trajectory of the light beams that struck his daggers, redirecting them where he wanted. It was dangerous and unpredictable, but Damon had no other choice. He needed to push himself further, relying on the one stat that could make the difference, his agility. 5x to agility. With a thought, he activated his skill. Experienced new stories on Empire. Agility, 85, 5x. His agility skyrocketed from 17 to 85. Instantly, the tension in his joints eased, and his body felt light, almost like rubber. Damon twisted and bent unnaturally, his movements fluid as he waved the daggers in a circular motion. Light beams struck their glass-like surfaces, but instead of scattering aimlessly, they ricocheted toward Xander with deadly precision. The redirected beams slammed into Xander's barriers, shattering them like fragile glass. Xander's eyes widened in disbelief. What? Damon didn't give him a moment to recover. He pursued the beams, allowing them to attack him while deftly dodging and redirecting them back toward Xander. Damon was ruthless, each movement devoid of hesitation or mercy. He aimed for the most vulnerable points, letting the beam strike in ways that could have ended Xander's life. Victory was all that mattered to him now. Whether Xander Ravenscroft survived or not was irrelevant. Xander's breathing quickened as he scrambled to conjure new barriers, the redirected light beams coming from unexpected and near-impossible angles. Damon's tactics were unorthodox, almost underhanded, and Xander couldn't help but feel trapped. If you think these petty tricks can defeat me, then you've got another thing coming. Xander snarled, his voice shaking with frustration. Damon sneered, bouncing off a nearby wall as he redirected another beam of light toward Xander. I'm not the one under pressure here. You are. I told you I'm going to win. Despite his confidence, Damon was painfully aware of his limitations. He had no barriers to protect himself. A single misstep could mean his end. Worse, his boosted agility came with a time limit. The 5x skill lasted only 5 minutes, with a cooldown of 10 minutes. He also knew the magic artillery was growing more intense by the second. I have to finish this within 5 minutes, he thought grimly. I can't lose. I need that money. Xander's thoughts mirrored Damon's desperation. I can't lose. My honor is on the line. Their gazes locked, Xander's deep blue eyes filled with fury and determination, while Damon's blindfold obscured his own, giving him an air of unwavering resolve. I will beat him. They both thought the same thing, their wills colliding in an unspoken battle of grit. Suddenly, the magic artillery shifted again. This time, glowing orbs floated out, hanging ominously in the air. As they reached their targets, the orbs brightened and exploded like bombs, the concussive force rattling the arena. Damon and Xander clenched their teeth, their focus sharper than ever. I must end this now. Professor Kale narrowed his eyes, his expression cold and unreadable. He had expected the battle to end swiftly, with Xander's overwhelming strength crushing Damon in mere moments. Yet, to his surprise, Damon had defied expectations, surviving the initial assault and proving to be far more formidable than Kale had assumed. The boy he had written off as insignificant displayed agility and precision far beyond anything he had shown before. Damon's movements were sharp, calculated, and entirely calm, his focus unwavering despite the barrage of light magic raining down on him. He has impressive motor skills, agile, with sharp instincts. A shame his mana pool is so pitifully low, and he's shown no aptitude for magic. He won't make it far in the academy. Kale's cold gaze followed the battle closely as Damon swung his daggers, redirecting the beams of light toward Xander with remarkable precision. So that's his plan. No wonder he chose the falsity daggers. The rest of the class was in uproar, their voices echoing through the arena. Did you see that? How is he moving so fast? That dirty cheater! He's using the daggers to send the attacks back at Xander. That has to be against the rules, right? That commoner scum should be punished. Among the crowd, Evangeline's sharp eyes gleamed as she studied Damon's technique. What an ingenious strategy, she murmured. To think he could deflect light with just the blades of his daggers. Sylvia, standing beside her, nodded in agreement. That level of precision requires incredible control. He must have been testing it earlier to refine his approach. Leona chuckled softly, her admiration clear. He's amazing. Since the rules forbid direct magical attacks, he's using the artillery's own magic to turn the tide against his opponent. It's bold and brilliant. Kale's expression remained stoic as he observed Damon's relentless movements. While the rest of the class was divided between outrage and awe, Kale couldn't deny the ingenuity of Damon's strategy. However, in his mind, the boy's lack of magical potential was a glaring flaw that would inevitably hold him back. A commendable effort, but this is only delaying the inevitable. Inside the arena, Damon had sustained several bruises, his chest heaving as he dodged yet another explosion of light magic. His legs felt like lead, his lungs burned, and sweat dripped into his eyes, but he pushed forward. Across from him, Xander wasn't faring much better. At first, the light orbs seemed manageable, exploding once and scattering beams in all directions. But as the match dragged on, their numbers multiplied. Now the entire arena was a death trap, filled with searing beams of magic and detonating orbs. Damon clenched his teeth, frustration mounting. I don't have much time. My skill is about to wear off, he thought grimly, the ticking clock of his temporary power boost weighing heavily on his mind. He sensed the orbs of light in his shadow perception, their deadly energy crackling ominously. I have to risk it all. Tightening his grip on the twin daggers, Damon did the unthinkable. He charged straight toward the light orbs. Just as he reached the first, he swung his dagger with all his might, sending the orb hurtling toward the reflecting walls. It bounced off with a blinding flash and smashed into the barrier Xander was hiding behind. The impact sent Xander flying, the light engulfing him in a fiery explosion. But Damon's sharp eyes caught the flicker of another barrier forming between Xander and the attack. Find your next adventure on Empire. TC. He blocked it, Damon muttered, his irritation rising. Not giving Xander a chance to recover, Damon sprinted after him. Sliding low, he struck another of Xander's barriers with his dagger, cracking it just as he narrowly dodged another orb of light. The orb exploded violently behind him, catching Xander off guard. Ah! Xander's muffled cry echoed as he tumbled to the ground, his body bloodied and battered. But Damon showed no mercy. Ignoring the searing pain in his limbs, he charged through a barrage of light beams, allowing them to graze him in non-lethal areas. His target was clear, the largest orb of light hovering ominously ahead. Slashing at it with his dagger, the orb detonated in a blinding flash. The force of the explosion knocked Damon back, his body screaming in protest, but Xander took the brunt of it. Still reeling from the earlier attack, he was caught in the scattered light beams, his blood sizzling under the heat. Ark! Xander groaned, his body convulsing as shattered ribs and torn flesh overwhelmed him. Despite the agony, he staggered to his feet, his vision blurred and his uniform in tatters. Through gritted teeth, he growled, "Gravity magic! Weighted world!" The gravity in the arena shifted, pulling down everything around him. The light beams slowed slightly, their momentum dulled by the oppressive force. "I won't lose," Xander rasped, his voice barely audible. "I won't lose to the likes of you," he roared, blood dripping from his mouth. On the other side, Damon wasn't in much better shape. His uniform was scorched, his limbs felt like lead, and blood seeped from countless cuts. His legs ached, and his body screamed for rest, but he stood firm. He's still standing? How? He took that attack point blank. Damon's thoughts raced as he gritted his teeth. "It doesn't matter. I'll still win," he muttered, his voice steely with determination. Damon dodged another beam, his movements growing sluggish as his 5x agility, skill teetered on the edge of deactivation. Glancing at Xander, he noticed how the gravity magic suppressed the light beams around him, but Damon sneered. "Having more mana than me won't save you." Xander roared back. "You're the one who needs saving." Damon snarled as he made his move, slamming his left dagger into another orb of light. The light burned his arm, but he bit back the scream, forcing the orb toward Xander. Xander, already weakened, raised a cracked barrier. The orb collided with it and exploded violently, forcing him back. Damon seized the moment and hurled his right dagger at the barrier. The blade shattered on impact, breaking through and letting the light blast engulf Xander completely. The force of the attack sent Xander flying into the arena wall, his body crumpling to the ground, unmoving. Blood pooled beneath him, his sword shattered beside him. Damon stood amidst the chaos, his left arm burned and useless, his body trembling as the effects of his 5x agility skill faded. He staggered, struggling to stay upright. I win," he whispered hoarsely, exhaustion washing over him like a wave. But just as he was about to collapse, a faint twitch caught his eye. Xander's blood-covered hand clenched, his battered body trembling as he forced himself to stand. "I'm not done yet," Xander roared, his voice raw with defiance. Damon's face paled, his breath catching in his throat. No way." Xander's entire body screamed in agony, his muscles seizing with every shallow breath. His skin was charred and burned, blood seeped from countless wounds, and his legs felt like they no longer existed. The arena blurred before his eyes, but his mind was aflame with a single thought. "I can't lose. I can't lose to a commoner. Not after everything they've done. I can't lose." With a guttural groan, he raised his head, his blood-streaked face pale and haggard. His eyes, barely open, fixated on his opponent. The commoner, no, Damon Grey, stood a short distance away, his body a bloody mess. A black blindfold obscured his eyes, but his expression remained unervingly calm. Even now, Xander could feel the quiet determination radiating from the man he once considered beneath notice. "He's just a bug," Xander thought, though the words rang hollow in his mind. Damon wasn't supposed to have come this far. He was an insignificant insect, not even worth acknowledging among commoners. But now, Damon stood tall despite his injuries, his left arm red and raw, burned almost beyond recognition. In his right hand, he held the falsity dagger, its edge slick with his own blood. Xander gritted his teeth, anger bubbling through his pain. "I can't move, but even so, I won't lose. I refuse to lose." Above them, the magic artillery began to stir again, the hum of light magic growing louder as it prepared another barrage. Damon shifted slightly, sensing the change with his shadow perception, but his movements were sluggish. Xander roared, his voice raw and filled with desperation. "I won't lose to the likes of you, a lowly commoner." His blood-soaked hands trembled as he did the unthinkable. He reversed the flow of his gravity magic. The arena seemed to tremble as Xander's magic warped. Instead of pulling down, his gravity spell pushed upward, creating an opposing force that reflected the incoming light magic. The orbs of searing energy, once aimed to obliterate him, now reversed course, streaking back toward Damon with deadly precision. From the stands, Professor Keel's eyes narrowed in astonishment. He created a new spell mid-battle, just to counter the light magic attacks. Damon's body tensed. His shadow perception allowed him to sense the incoming attack, but his battered frame was far too damaged and sluggish to react in time. The reflected light magic struck him head-on. The blast sent Damon flying, his body engulfed in flames of radiant energy. His skin burned, and he coughed violently as the impact seared his lungs. He hit the ground hard, skidding to a stop as his blood soaked the dirt beneath him. Xander huffed, barely standing, one eye closed while the other fluttered open just enough to glare at his opponent. He forced a twisted smile, his teeth stained crimson. "I won't lose to a lowly commoner. Your kind are disgusting, ungrateful mongrels. I could never be beaten by someone like you." he spat, though every word seemed to drain him further. Damon lay sprawled on the ground, his chest heaving as he tried to suck in air. His hands twitched, fumbling for the dagger that had fallen from his grip, its hilt slick with his own blood. I can't move. Damon's thoughts were hazy, his body screaming in protest. His vision blurred, and every breath felt like shards of glass ripping through his chest. Above him, the glowing orbs of light magic hovered ominously, primed to end his life. Then, a sharp notification cut through the haze. Ding! HP. 19/50ths. I can't breathe. The words echoed in his mind, despair settling like a stone in his gut as the looming light grew brighter, promising only death. Damon's consciousness was slipping away, his mind teetering on the edge as he fell deeper into his shadow perception. His senses spiraled out of control, extending far beyond the arena and reaching the observation deck where his classmates stood. That commoner has finally learned his place, one scoffed. What can you expect from trash? Another chimed in with a sneer. He should just be expelled from the academy already, a third remarked with a tone dripping in disdain. Leona bit her lip, her fists clenched as she stared down at Damon's crumpled form. Come on, Damon, get up. You can't lose like this, she whispered, her voice trembling with desperation. Above the crowd, Professor Kale's cold, detached voice rang out, cutting through the cacophony of jeers. It was inevitable. He never stood a chance. A spark of anger flared deep within Damon's fading consciousness. His blood boiled, his spirit roaring back to life. I can't lose. Not now. Not when this is my only chance to save her. With an agonized roar, Damon forced himself to his feet, swaying unsteadily. His laughter started low, broken and guttural, before rising into something cold and defiant. The blindfold slipped from his face, revealing his dark, unyielding eyes. The shadows around him rippled and coiled as he reined in his shadow perception, bringing his scattered senses under control even as his body screamed in protest. He pointed his cracked, blood-streaked dagger at Xander, his voice sharp as ice. You can call me lowly all you want, but you and I aren't so different. The only thing special about you is the fact that you were born into wealth. You haven't earned a single thing yourself. You've never worked a day in your life. Everything you have, everything you are, was handed to you on a golden platter. You aren't special. You're just another child of privilege, benefiting from the accident of your birth. Xander, still rooted in place, glared at Damon. His body was too heavy to move, his magic reserves stretched to their limit. But his pride wouldn't let him falter. Then we'll see who has the last laugh, Xander growled, his voice laced with venom. Enjoy more content from Empire. He took a single, agonizing step forward into the swirling field of light magic. The attacks intensified, their ferocity building to a crescendo. A massive orb of light, several meters wide, formed between the two combatants, its energy pulsating ominously. It was clear to everyone watching. Whoever managed to push that orb toward the other would emerge victorious, or be the last one standing. Xander gritted his teeth and forced another step, his gravity magic flaring as he reversed its pull. Damon, clutching his dagger, roared in defiance and sprinted toward the massive orb, his shattered body trembling with every movement. From above, Professor Kale's face twisted in concern as he barked. That's enough, you two. You'll get yourselves killed. This match is over. Neither boy paid him any mind. Shut up, they roared in unison, their voices raw and filled with unrelenting determination. Damon thrust his dagger into the orb, but the weapon shattered on impact. Shards of the blade flew toward his face, slicing deep into his skin and painting his cheeks with fresh streaks of blood. He gritted his teeth, his disabled arm trembling as he raised it to press against the ball of light. Both hands burned as he pushed with all his might. Xander, unable to raise his arms, leaned his entire weight against the orb, his gravity magic in reverse acting as his only counterforce. The searing pain burned through both boys, but neither relented. Damon's vision swam, his strength fading. He bit down on his lip until it bled, refusing to let the orb consume him. Using my arms alone won't be enough. They'll break before this thing even moves. He closed his eyes, summoning the little amounts of his mana. Shadows flickered and coalesced in his palms, forming a dense ball of shadow magic. It's true, I have a small mana pool, and I can't cast spells like the rest of you. But I refuse to lose to anyone in battle. With this tiny power of mine, I will bring down a giant. With a defiant roar, Damon poured all his remaining mana, every ounce of energy he had, into the orb of shadow magic. The collision of light and shadow triggered a chain reaction. Magic attributes exploded, sending waves of destruction cascading through the arena. Blinding light rained down, ripping through the air with deafening force. The shockwave hurled both boys across the arena, their bodies slamming into the walls with sickening splatters of blood. Ding! HP 2/50. As the light dimmed, the arena fell into eerie silence. The two boys lay motionless, twitching faintly as blood pooled around them. Xander's body shuddered once before falling still, his energy completely spent. Damon couldn't see. His eyes were flooded with blood. But through the veil of darkness, his shadow perception picked up faint sounds, the hurried footsteps of healers rushing toward the arena. He let out a low, guttural grunt, forcing his battered body to move. One agonizing step. He stumbled and fell, but his shattered arms clawed at the ground, dragging his broken body forward, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. When he finally reached Xander, Damon forced himself to stand, his legs trembling as if they might give out at any moment. Darkness encroached on his vision, and his entire body screamed for him to stop. Death's cold embrace was mere inches away, but he stood tall, his silhouette ragged and bloodied. He looked down at Xander, whose bloodshot eyes barely fluttered open. Island, Damon whispered, his voice hoarse but resolute. Xander's eyes filled with tears of rage and despair before they closed, his consciousness slipping away. Damon heard the distant shouts of the healers growing closer, but the world around him faded into nothingness. The shadows of his perception went silent as his own senses dulled. Yet, even as everything went dark, Damon remained standing, broken, bloodied, and triumphant. The battle was nothing short of shocking. Xander Ravenscroft, the third-ranked student, against Damon Grey, the weakest in the academy. It was a duel that should have ended the moment it began, with Xander's overwhelming power obliterating Damon's feeble mana pool. But the outcome defied all expectations. Against all odds, there Damon stood, battered and bloodied, towering over his defeated opponent. The arena, once filled with jeers and mockery, had fallen into a stunned silence. Those who had belittled Damon now looked upon him with a mix of awe and disbelief. His unyielding spirit cast a shadow over their contempt, forcing them to confront the undeniable truth. This was no ordinary student. They recalled his words, his philosophy, which they had dismissed as the ravings of a deluded fool. Now those very words resonated in their minds. Impossible. How did he survive? Is he even human? No one can take that much damage and still stand. He's a freak. Professor Kale had long since abandoned his post outside the observation deck. The intensity of the final clash had convinced him that the duel had gone far beyond the bounds of safety. He'd attempted to intervene, but the combatants were too consumed by their struggle to heed his commands. Find exclusive stories on Empire. Dark magic was Kale's specialty, not healing. Even if he had managed to reach them in time, his abilities would have been of little use in mending their broken bodies. Frustrated and powerless, he called for emergency healers, barking into his communicator with urgency. Fortunately, the response was swift. The healers were stationed nearby, anticipating potential injuries from such matches. Kale didn't waste time trying to unlock the massive vaulted doors. Instead, he summoned a surge of dark energy, punching a hole through the barrier with raw force. As the path opened, Leona darted inside like a storm, her body crackling with the energy of her strong attribute magic. Her golden eyes locked onto Damon's bloodied form, standing defiant but holding himself upright. Her heart pounded with worry and rage as she rushed him. "Damon, Damon," she whispered, her voice trembling. Yet she hesitated. His injuries were so severe that she feared touching him might worsen his condition. Behind her, the healers flooded into the arena, led by Kale himself. Sylvia and Evangeline followed shortly after, their faces pale with dread as they surveyed the scene. Xander and Damon were carefully placed on stretchers, their bodies surrounded by the shimmering light of various healing spells. Marcus stumbled into the blood-soaked arena, dropping to his knees beside Xander. His face was a mask of fear and desperation as he reached out, whispering his friend's name. Leona clenched her fists tightly, her body trembling with suppressed anger as her gaze flickered between Xander and Damon. It had been an honorable duel, and Damon had emerged victorious, but that did little to quell the rage simmering in her heart. "Caw! Caw! Dead, dead, dead!" The ominous cry of the raven perched on Sylvia's shoulder broke the tense silence. The bird flapped its wings uneasily before flying over to perch on Damon's stretcher. Sylvia's face turned ghostly white as the raven's words echoed in her ears. She couldn't just stand there. She pushed past the healers tending to Damon, her hands trembling as she prepared spell. "Let me help," she insisted, her voice unsteady. Lunar restoration. A soft, silvery light enveloped her hands as she channeled her strongest healing spell. The pale glow of her moon attribute magic seeped into Damon's battered body, but the results were underwhelming. The wounds were too severe. Healing magic could only do so much for someone teetering on the brink of death. Her voice quivered as she asked, Is he still alive?" The healer beside her, cloaked in a dark hood, nodded grimly. "He's alive, barely. With injuries like these, he should have died instantly." "It's amazing." The healer glanced at Sylvia, noting the trembling in her hands and the worry etched into her features. "Your friend, he's a tough one," the healer added softly. Sylvia swallowed hard, willing herself to believe those words as the pale light of her magic continued to shine. Damon Grey, the weakest in the academy, had survived the impossible. But at what cost? Evangeline bit her lip, her teeth pressing hard enough to nearly draw blood. Unlike Sylvia, she couldn't help, not in any meaningful way. While she had the ability to use healing light magic, it was weak, an inferior imitation of what Sylvia could accomplish. All she could do now was clasp her hands together and whisper silent prayers to the goddess of doom, pleading for the lives of classmates to be spared. I should have stopped them. The thought clawed at her heart like a blade. She felt a deep, gnawing regret as she stared at Damon and Xander, both battered and bloodied. Today had been fun, of all things, almost like a party of adventurers from the stories. And Damon had been the glue that held them together. But now everything was in shambles. Xander and Damon had always been at odds. Their personalities, their ideals, everything about them clashed. Both were too stubborn to yield, too steadfast to compromise. Evangeline clenched her fists tightly, the guilt eating her alive. Why did I let this happen? Marcus stood nearby, pale as a ghost, his face frozen in horror. His heart pounded erratically in his chest as he watched the healers frantically work on Xander. "Clear, heal again. One more time." The healers' voices rang out urgently, the buzz of their combined lightning and healing magic filling the room. "We need 2 vials of revitalization potion now." Marcus barely heard them. His mind was spinning, trapped in a vortex of fear and despair. First Lark had disappeared, only to be later declared dead. Then Isaac vanished without a trace, and though no body had been found, everyone had already assumed the worst. Now Tobias, another of their friends, was being accused of unspeakable crimes. It was too much. Marcus's head throbbed as tears spilled down his face. His hands trembled as he pressed them against his temples. What is happening to us? Oh, goddess, I beg you, please help us." As his blurred gaze drifted, It fell upon Damon Grey's unconscious body. The sight of the boy filled Marcus with a mix of anger and an icy, unshakable dread. Damon had always been stubborn, always unyielding. Even when beaten, his piercing blue eyes had never lost their icy resolve. But now, his eyes, they were blue, but now they're black. Marcus's mind raced, piecing together fragments of unsettling memories. His eyes changed. Was it after we beat him up and left him for dead beyond the barrier? The realization struck him like a thunderclap. He spent the entire night beyond the Academy barrier, Marcus whispered, his voice trembling, in a monster-infested area covered in blood. The blood should have drawn monsters. There's no way he could have survived. He gulped, his throat dry as sandpaper. Damon survived in the evil forest covered in blood for a whole night. And yet, he came back. But his eyes are different now. Marcus's fear deepened, his mind spiraling into darker and darker places. He's faster than before, stronger than before. I even heard rumors that he fought Leona Veilfire and survived. Could it be? No, this isn't Damon Grey. His body shook violently, his face pale as death. It's a monster pretending to be him. His breath quickened, and his thoughts turned frantic. The monsters beyond the barrier were all stronger than any first-year student. I have to tell the professors, but if I do, it means admitting that we killed the real Damon Grey. Lark, Isaac, they must have been killed by it too. Marcus's knees buckled as he staggered back, his mind a swirling tempest of fear and guilt. I need more evidence, or they won't believe me. He clenched his fists, his nails digging painfully into his palms. I need to know the truth no matter what it takes.